A very good evening to all my dear students. I hope you all have joined the session. So I can see Menon, Sudhanshu, Siddharth, Amit, Hitesh have already joined. So students, before starting the class, let me just ask you whether you have read the chapter number 4, which we have done so far. Because students, I'm repeating it again and again that you will be able to understand the concept and you will be able to remember it only once you have gone through these videos and when you have read the module in entirety, including the illustrations and examples. I always say why illustrations and examples, because these are going to help you to answer the MCQs, true, false, or your descriptive type questions also. Okay? So please tell me quickly whether you have learned or not. So Khushi is saying, yes, ma'am, I have learned it. That's very good, Khushi. And I expect the same for other students also. Also, students, today, CA Rajesh Sachdeva sir from Board of Studies, ICAI, he will be interacting with you and he will be guiding you with respect as to how to prepare for exam, how to write the exams, right? So students, this is a golden opportunity for all of you to learn from such a learned person. You can ask your queries, whatever are your queries there related to the subject, related to as to how to write the exam. So he'll be joining in maybe within half an hour. So please take advantage of this opportunity and ask maximum queries. Okay? So now come back to chapter number 4. We have completed the evaluation of internal control in the last session, along with the various methods that auditor can use in order to accumulate the information while he is evaluating the internal control. Okay? So now we'll be starting with topic testing of internal control, and today we have to complete the entire chapter, and if the time will permit, we'll revise this chapter and we'll discuss the remaining questions that we were discussing in the last session. Okay? So I would like to tell you all that Parth Shah, he has just joined and he's saying that, ma'am, I'm Parth Shah from BCC batch 4. Glad to inform that I have passed both the group of CA intermediate with AIR 15 and he got 67 marks in auditing. And he is thanking Institute for these classes. Parth, we are actually overwhelmed and many congratulations to you and your family. So students, like Parth has secured 67 in auditing and AIR 15. And he has written that he has taken advantage of these classes. So students, please, this is an opportunity for you. These classes have been organized by our institute for you people. And today, sir will be joining and he'll be resolving your queries. So please take advantage of all these sessions, all these interactions. Okay? So many congratulations to Parth and his family from the entire ICAI. So Radhika is also congratulating Parth. Chalo, theek hai. So now testing of internal control. So students, in our last 3 sessions, we have discussed a number of topics about internal control, right? We understood what is internal control, what is the purpose, right? The nature of internal control, then what understanding the auditor needs to obtain about internal control. Remember? Then we did a topic with respect to evaluation of internal control. Okay? Now there is a topic which is very important, which is what testing of internal control. So now many of you are thinking that, ma'am, already we have understood, already we have evaluated internal control. Now what is this testing of internal control? Okay? So students, see, auditor, we as auditors, we have understood the design and implementation of internal control, right? In design, we saw that whether the design of the internal control is such that it is effective right? And with respect to implementation, we have to see whether it is implemented properly by whom, by the management, right? When we were evaluating internal control, we were understanding about the quality of the internal control, right? And there we discussed various benefits about evaluation of test of control, internal control, whereby we did that auditor will be able to understand as to whether the internal control will be able to locate the error and fraud on timely basis. So far we have obtained an understanding about the internal control, its quality, right? But now when the auditor is actually relying on the internal controls, so before relying on the internal controls, he need to test the internal control. He need to perform certain audit procedures in order to obtain audit evidence as to whether as how much these internal controls are actually in operation. Okay? So testing of internal control is very, very important. Why? Because abhi tak to we have obtained just understanding of internal control. Now we are studying as to how to actually test the internal control, how auditor will be actually testing. Okay? So he will be testing the internal controls on selective basis. See students, there must be number of internal controls that management has implemented, and you all now know that we are concerned with what? The controls which are relevant to audit. Hana? So there must be number of internal controls. Now it is not possible for the auditor to check all the internal controls in a particular year under audit. So what can auditor do? What he can do is he will test the internal control on selective basis, so as to ensure that all the important controls, they get tested, let's say within a period of 3 years. Okay? So all the internal controls, he'll divide them. With respect to first year, I'll be checking these internal controls. In the second year, I'll be testing these internal controls which are different from the earlier ones. Okay? And same way with respect to the third year, he'll check the remaining internal controls. So he'll try to cover the important areas of internal controls which have been implemented. So we are doing what? Actual testing on selective basis. Okay? So what will auditor do? So first of all, what he can do is, the way we have understood the example of sales in our last session, that how the sales happen. So internal controls are implemented on every stage of sales. So he may select certain sales transactions and he will apply his audit procedures in order to obtain audit evidence that these sales were made as by following the internal control. Okay? At each and every step, he is going to check. So basically, I can say application of procedural test. He'll be testing the procedures which have been laid down by the management, and he can check by way of auditing in depth. What is auditing in depth? Auditing in depth is basically when the auditor is checking a transaction from the very beginning to the very end. Like starting se leke end tak, auditor will be checking as to whether it has been as per the directions given by the management. Okay? So why testing? Is it clear? Quickly send in your replies. So Parth is saying, ma'am, I studied totally from BCC. That's good, Parth. And he especially made an effort to come in this session and inform us about that. Chalo, that's good. So students, tell me, what was my query, that are you able to understand what is meant by testing of internal control and why we are testing? Because abhi tak to humne kya kiya tha? We have just obtained an understanding of the internal control. Now we will be testing the internal control. So what is testing of internal control? Let us just have a look. So after assimilating is what? Understanding, fully understanding internal control, auditor needs to examine whether and how far internal control is actually in operation. So the keywords here are actually in operation. पता तो है कि internal control है. We have also understood कि design क्या है, what is the implementation. We have also understood the quality, but whether they are actually in operation or not, CCTV cameras have been installed, है ना? But they are not working. So actually in operation, है ना, there is a system that traveling bill exceeding rupees 50,000 is to be signed by 2 signatories. Now, अच्छा system है, design is good, implementation is good, quality is also good, है ना? It will help in reducing the risk associated with payment of fake invoices with respect to traveling bills. But whether it is actually in operation or वो कैसे पता चलेगा? By doing what? Actual testing. So 100% testing, is it possible? No. So selective basis पे auditor will test. For example, all important areas are covered in a period of, let's say, 3 years. ठीक है? How he will be testing? Application of procedural test. Procedural test is whatever procedures have been let down by the management, whether each and everything has been done, है ना? And auditing in depth, checking from the very beginning till the end, the entire transaction, है ना? उसको starting से end तक auditor will check, ठीक है? Now, what all the auditor will be checking when he's testing the controls? So basically, see students, now what is it mentioned? Test of controls are performed to obtain audit evidence. Audit evidence about what? Effectiveness of design of accounting and internal control system. Operation of internal control throughout the period. So now auditor is what? He is obtaining audit evidence. है ना? अभी तक क्या था? We were obtaining an understanding. है ना? We were evaluating the quality. Why? Because we wanted to know about control risk. है ना? We wanted to know as to whether the internal control is effective or not, whether we can rely or not. Now auditor has decided that ठीक है, I'll rely. But before relying, auditor, please be doubly sure that these internal controls are in fact actually in operation. है ना? So इसीलिए now the word used is what? Obtain audit evidence. Auditor is now performing the test of controls in order to obtain audit evidence with respect to effectiveness of what? Design of accounting and internal control system and operation throughout the audit. देखो जब when we understood, है ना, when we evaluated the internal control, this word audit evidence was not used. Why we were doing all that we were gaining all that understanding, or we were evaluating in order to see whether it is effective or not, in order to assess what? The control risk, so that we can determine our strategy as to whether to rely on internal controls or not. ठीक है? Clear है? So Radhika, is it clear? Is it clear, Radhika? There was a doubt of Radhika. ठीक है? So students are saying that ma'am, हम भी पार्थ भैया जैसे पढ़ेंगे. That is very good. ठीक है? So, and when the auditor is testing the internal control, it includes what? Elements of the control environment also. This, so you know that whatever are the components of internal control, auditor has to consider all those components. Now, what all audit procedures the auditor can perform? He can inspect, right? He can perform inspection. He can do inquiries and observation, and he can perform what? He can re-perform the task. Okay? Now, how inspection can be done in order to check the internal controls, in order to check whether internal control are actually working. They are actually in operation. For example, see if there is an internal control that with respect to traveling bills exceeding rupees 50,000, these will be signed by 2 signatories. So now what auditor can do on selective basis, he can call for the traveling vouchers and he can see whether these are actually signed by 2 signatories if it is a manual system, and if it is an automated, then there must be some software or system which has been used. So he'll see there as to who has authorized the payment of such bills exceeding rupees 50,000. So he is doing what? He is inspecting. Okay. Now inquiries. Let us try to understand this with the help of an example. So here I gave you example of what? Traveling bill exceeding rupees 50,000, and my favorite example of what? 2 authorized signatories. Okay. Inquiries. For example, some process is there and there is segregation of duty. Different personnel has been they have been given different work. Now auditor can always make the inquiries of such personnel as to what work you have done. He may ask, suppose a task with respect to, let's say, the entire sales process, receiving the order, approving, then making the entries, then giving the requisition to the production department. So entire process has been given to different personnel A, B, C, D. So auditor can inquire A, B, C, D as to what is your work, what work has been done by you. Okay. Observation. Example, one of the internal control is what? Physical verification of inventory. So auditor can observe that. Okay. So auditor is performing what? He is performing the audit procedure to now, what is the purpose? To obtain audit evidence that the internal controls are actually in operation. Okay. So auditor would obtain an understanding as to how the controls are applied, consistency with which they are applied. ऐसा तो नहीं है that ये जो traveling bill वाला authorization है, it happens only at the year start and the year end. During the year, the 10 months, like only in the April and the March month, this happens. Otherwise, during the year, the 10 months, there is no thing like authorization of traveling bills. So consistency, consistently, whether it has been applied or not. ऐसा तो नहीं है that April में है, May में नहीं है, June में है. No. Auditor will see the consistency and by whom they have been applied. Is there internal department only which is applying such internal controls, or whether the same has been outsourced? It might be possible now that some, let's say IBM has been given the work of implementing the financial internal control has been given to some IT company. So whether the same has been outsourced. Okay? So is it clear? Okay. Now, students, it might be possible now that when auditor is assessing the control risk, he identifies certain deviation that in his earlier assessment, the control were working in some way. However, right now the control are working in some other ways. It might be possible. So straightforward auditor will not say that internal control are weak. What he'll do, he will identify what are the factors which are leading to such deviations, such differences. See, it might be possible now that right now there is some seasonal fluctuation. The volume of sales is so high that there is a difference in internal control which he assessed earlier and now. Okay? Same way, it might be possible that he assessed the internal control. Now there has been change in the key personnel, the person who was implementing the internal control earlier in his earlier assessment, and now there has been change in the personnel. So auditor will what? He'll consider the factors and he'll make sure that whenever there is a change, there is some seasonal fluctuation or change in the personnel, he will make what? Specific inquiries regarding such matters. Okay? So he'll make specific inquiries. And if suppose we have understood that when auditor is assessing the risk of material misstatement, he was understanding the inherent risk and control risk. Let's say at that time he assessed that control risk is high. Okay? Or let's say control risk is low. Thereby he decided to rely on internal control. But now when he's actually testing, he finds that in fact control risk is high, internal control is not very effective. So he can revise his assessment and he may change to what? Not to rely. ठीक है. So this concept we have already done. ठीक है. So let us just have a look from the module whatever we have done so far. And students, in case of any query, keep on sending the queries. Bindu, Sai, Lakshmi, with respect to automated system, I'll be taking up your query in the second half of this session. So what is assimilating? It means fully understanding. So after fully understanding the internal control system, auditor needs to understand as to whether and how far the same is what? Internal control is actually in operation. And this is done by what? Actual testing. Is 100% possible? No, selective basis pe karna hai. How? By way of application of procedural test and auditing in depth. So what is procedural test? Whatever procedures have been laid down by management, whether these have been complied with. Aage example has been given, we'll see that. Now, why test of control? In order to obtain audit evidence. देखो पहले understanding लिया था, है ना? But अब when we are actually going to rely on internal control, see, we are giving an expert opinion. ऐसे थोड़ा ना rely कर लेंगे. We will first test whether they are actually in operation as planned by the management. तो क्या क्या check करेंगे? Design of accounting and internal control system, whether it is able to, remember P or D and C, prevent or detect and correct. या तो prevent करना है या detect करके अगर वो हो जाता है तो error या fraud, तो detect करके क्या करना है? Correct करना है. What? Material misstatement and operation of internal control at one point of time? No, throughout the period. ठीक है. And you can have a read at this paragraph. It basically says that if there is no, this point we haven't done. Let me just explain it to you. See, when the auditor was obtaining an understanding, when he was assessing the risk of material misstatement, he was obtaining an understanding of the internal control. Okay? Now at that time, see, we obtain an understanding of internal control. Our purpose is not to obtain audit evidence उस time पर. But our purpose is what? To obtain an understanding कि control risk कैसा है in order to assess the control risk. But if at that time when he was inquiring with management or when he was inspecting the documents, he obtains certain audit evidence, though specifically he did not perform any procedure to obtain audit evidence. His purpose was to understand. But audit evidence मिल जाता है. So can he use that as an audit evidence with respect to actual operation of test of control? The answer is yes. If that audit evidence is sufficient enough, he can use that in his as an audit evidence that the internal controls are working effectively. Okay? So you can just read this. Then test of control, it may include what? Inspection, inquiries, observation, reperformance. Okay? Reperformance is like example BRS. The one of the internal control of the organization is making the bank reconciliation statements. So auditor can reperform it, remake it, and see whether the results are same or not. Okay? And this is basically talking about what? Deviations. If deviations are there, for example, change in key personnel or seasonal fluctuations, then auditor needs to ensure that test of controls उस period के लिए भी हो when there has been such change. Okay? And he can always revise his assessment if required, and accordingly he can change the ND of audit procedures. Okay? Now about the procedural testing. So it is mentioned that procedural test simply means testing of compliance with the procedures laid down by the management in respect of what? Initiation, authorization, recording, what is this? Documentation of transaction at each stage. So this example beautifully explains, and I can write good example here. You can go through it. It basically says that with respect to procedure of sales, if there are certain steps, कि credit देने से पहले, before giving credit, the credit worthiness will be checked. So auditor will see whether it has actually been checked. Before taking the order, the position in inventory will be checked. So auditor will see all the communications, whether the same has been done or not. So this is what? Application of what? Procedural test. जितने भी procedures हैं, testing them. Okay? So you can read this as a homework, and this is also the explanation of that example only. Okay? So I hope it is clear with respect to internal control testing. So let me just have a look at the queries and then I'll start with the next topic. Auditing in depth means when you are checking a transaction from the very beginning till the end. When the transaction initiated, from that moment, all the documents till the end of the transaction, you are checking each and every all the documents. Okay? Yes, Karthik, you are correct. SC 330 is about test of controls and substantive procedures. Okay? You all have done test of controls and substantive procedure in detail in chapter number 3. So that is why the various audit procedures which we just discussed, inspection, inquiry, observation, reperformance, I did not take them in detail because detailed explanation has been given in chapter number 3. Okay? See, evaluation में तो understanding था ना आज था, but here you are actually testing, आप actually वो perform करके देख रहे हो कि जो रिजल्ट है वो ठीक आ रहा है या नहीं. इंटरनल कंट्रोल की आपने जो अंडरस्टैंडिंग ली, नाउ यू आर अप्लाइंग दैट अंडरस्टैंडिंग एक्चुअल टेस्टिंग सिस्टम पर करके देख रहे हो कि व्हाट आर द रिजल्ट्स. ठीक है, ठीक है. Yes, Khushi. See, auditor decided that he'll rely, but as a 330 says that auditor, listen, you are an expert. Hana, you are relying on internal control. You have obtained understanding in 315 essay. But 330 says that before relying, please be doubly sure. Be sure about the actual operation of the internal control. ठीक है, खुशी? Hiral, is your doubt clear with respect to auditing in depth? ठीक है? So Radhika, you can send in your queries. अभी बहुत time है session में. So I'll try to resolve your queries. Otherwise, we'll be meeting in other chapters also. So you can ask there also. ठीक है? So I hope all your queries are resolved. Now, the next topic is what? Internal control and IT environment. ठीक है? Now, students, see what is IT environment. First of all, quickly send in your replies. What is IT environment? Send in your replies. So students, see, an entity's internal control, it can have manual elements. Also, it can have what? Automated elements. Manual elements, like if I can say that authorization is to be done by signing of the authorized signatory on paper form. Manual. Automated can be like when there is a system in the software itself. That let's say that if you remember, I gave you an example that whenever any tax payment is to be made, then 2 days prior to the due date, a pop-up will automatically get generated. The concerned person will see that pop-up that after 2 days, the tax payments are to be made. This is what, again, a part of internal control. So internal control can have manual elements as well as the automated elements. Now, what is the effect? See, the way the transaction is initiated, it is recorded, the follow-ups are done. In case of manual, it will be what? All paper form. And in case of automated, it will be through the IT systems. Okay? So there is a change. There will be a change in the internal control system depending upon whether manual controls are there or IT related controls are there. And IT environment of an organization can be a mix of manual element as well as the IT, the automated element. Okay? Now, when there is automated environment, for example, students, in case of banks, the interest is calculated automatically. Interest automatically calculate होके आ जाता है ना. However, earlier there used to be manual calculation of interest. So see how risky that was. Mistakes on account of error can be there. Calculation errors can be there, right? So now all these things have been automated. है ना, आपके पास मैसेजेस आते हैं, एसएमएस इमीडिएटली आ जाता है whenever you make any transaction. So everything is automated. So there are certain benefits, there are certain demerits of IT when it is being used in the internal control system. So let us have a look at this. So internal control and IT environment. So students are saying that IT environment means it seems like something related to automated environment, right? Okay. So control in manual and IT system. So it basically says that difference kya ho jata hai? That paper is replaced by electronic format. Electronic format is there in IT system and paper document is there in the manual documentation. Okay? And IT system consists of a combination of automated as well as the manual control. Okay? Entities mix of manual and automatic element. It varies with the nature and complexity of entities used. And it depends upon what is the use. Now, what are the benefits and what are the disadvantages or the risk associated with the IT environment? This I expect that you all can very well do. So let us just quickly go through these benefits and the disadvantages. Then I think you have the opportunity within the next 5 minutes to communicate, to interact with sir from Board of Studies. So let us discuss this IT benefits. So what are these? See, if IT is been used in the entity's internal control, there will be consistency, right? There will be processing of large volumes of transaction. Okay? The data will be available in no time. Like you can quickly access what is the balance, Hana, using your bank statement from online bank statement. You can quickly see what are the interest payments, Hana, and accuracy of information. Then additional analysis of information. Accounting system, if they are like good accounting system, they give you pie diagrams, the charts whereby some comparisons can be done. So additional analysis of information. Then ability to monitor the performance. Hana, comparisons can be done, Hana, using various pie charts or the tables, and if CCTV cameras are there to monitoring the performance. Okay? Reduce the risk that controls are circumvented. Circumvented is what? Avoided. Hana? So if, see, in IT it is difficult to avoid the controls. If password and IDs are to be entered, then they are to be entered. Otherwise, you cannot make the entry. Okay? And it helps in segregation of duty. How? Because different personals have different authorization in the system. They can do what they have been authorized. Hana? So segregation of duty hoga hi hoga. Okay? So this is what benefits. Now, what are the risks? Let's say that some incorrect data has been entered. For example, GST rate that has been wrongly entered. Now, system will keep on processing that inaccurate data, or it may inaccurately process the data if some formula has been wrongly entered in the master file. So this is one of the disadvantage. Unauthorized access can be done. Multiple user access to the database. Hackers are there. So unauthorized access to data. IT personnel, he is having the access to each and every ID and password. So it may be possible that segregation of duty ko he may break down, he may avoid it, because he is having the IDs and passwords of all the employees. Then unauthorized changes to master file. Unauthorized changes to systems or programs. Failure to make necessary changes. For example, if there has been a recent change in GST rate, but the same has not been incorporated in the system, but the management may feel that since the calculation is coming from an automated system, it is correct, right? However, the fact is that there has been a failure to make necessary changes. Inappropriate manual intervention can be there, and potential loss of data or inability to access the data. It might be possible that the server, the system is not working. Right? So as every coin has two sides, we have discussed what benefits and risk associated with using the IT system in the internal control system of an organization. Okay? So students, I'll do one thing. I'll stop here because now CA Rajesh Sachdeva sir has joined us, and I'll request you again to please use this opportunity to learn from a learned person like C. Rajneesh Sachdeva sir. He will guide you as to with respect to your preparation of exams, and he'll resolve all your queries. So please start posting in your queries. Sir, over to you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Thank you very much. Very good evening to all of the students. Who are the students present over here?
Sir, Karthik is there, Sudhanshu, Hariram.
Good evening to Karthik, Karthike, Sudhanshu, and tell me more names.
Hariram, Sonika, Siddharth.
Hariram, Sonika, then
Siddharth, Lakshmi.
Warm welcome, all of you, all students present over here. One of our students, Nancy, you were telling in the beginning, has scored 67 marks. Parth Shah,
and he
because I have written his name in my diary. Last time when I took the session, so I have written his name. Parth Shah, Harsh, Jamil, and Kushi. These were students when you were teaching last time for May 2022 attempt.
Right.
Then these students were present at that time when I was telling them how to prepare for.
And sir, he has mentioned that he is AIR 15 and he has studied totally from these classes.
Great. My heartiest congratulations to Parth Shah for this great achievement of scoring 16th rank. Congratulations to Parth and his family. Yes, students, warm welcome, very good evening, and thank you very much, Nancy. Yes, students, auditing, it is a pure theoretical subject, of course, but you will appreciate, students, that auditing starts where accountancy ends. Auditing starts where accountancy ends. What I mean to say is that audit, what we will audit as accountants, as chartered accountant, we will audit the accounts of a company, accounts of a firm, accounts of a non-profit making organization. So auditing of accounts, audit of what? Of accounts. So treat it as, while studying from your teachers like Nancy, Ashish sir is also teaching you, keep in mind that background, that audit of accounts will be done. And that way you will have the feeling of practical subject. So you should always have the feeling of practical subject while you are studying auditing. And always try to enjoy this subject, I should say. You should study this subject in very happy mood, in that I am getting enjoyment on studying this subject. And students, I know that you feel very much enjoyment while you are studying numerical subjects like accountancy, income tax, and so on, costing like subjects. But auditing, students say that it is boring or it is a theoretical orientation, whereas you see how much interesting your teachers are making this subject, and as I told you, that it is purely it is driven from accountancy. So a lot of students pose their query before us that, sir, we do not get marks in the auditing. This is the major issue, major query before us. First of all, before I answer this query, how to convert your understanding into marks. That is more important. When result comes, then you are scoring low marks in auditing, in particularly in auditing, then students are getting disappointed, and then they come to us, sir, we are not getting marks. So those techniques I will share with you, how to convert your understanding into marks. Before I proceed further, students, please note that Board of Studies is there to complete hand-holding of students, complete 100% hand-holding of students. Board of Studies is for students only, and you can call me anytime. My students, you can call me anytime, and I always share my both numbers, contact numbers. You can call me anytime. You can note my contact numbers. Even if I am in a meeting, I call back to each and every student. My students know me. So you should not hesitate while calling us, because we are doing complete hand holding of the students, and you should never hesitate. I am sharing my contact numbers. Nancy, please share my both contact numbers before you complete your lecture. And right now I am sharing my both numbers, 97180. You can note down, students, 97180 36119, and my other number is, students, 94667 89298. Nancy madam will share my email ID also, my landline number also she will share. Mobile numbers I have shared, students, and at the end of the lecture, Nancy madam will again share my contact numbers. Nancy, please share my contact numbers before you complete the lecture.
Sure, sir, sure.
Again, those who are unable to note right now can note again. Now, coming back to the not taking much time, because Nancy told me that she is about to finish the lecture today and lot of topics may be remaining to be covered. Understanding, but marks nahi aate. We understand the subject, but marks nahi aate. So understanding today, इसको मैं तीन parts में cover करता हूँ इस अपने topic को. First topic, मैं 8 chapters पे focus कर रहा हूँ, 8 chapters which are purely essay based chapters. Chapter 1, Chapter 2, Chapter 3, 4, then 5, Chapter 7, Chapter 8, and Chapter 11. These are, students, essay based chapters. Right now, my suggestion to all of you, आप जैसे साथ की साथ, along with you get you are understanding the things, आप अपने प्रिपरेशंस को पूरा अच्छी तरह से करना शुरू कर दीजिए, साथ साथ ही प्रिपेयर करना शुरू कर दीजिए. चैप्टर की प्रिपरेशन साथ साथ, क्वेश्चन, ये क्वेश्चन एग्जाम में आएगा तो ये आंसर होगा, ये क्वेश्चन आएगा तो लाइक दिस. डू नॉट वेट कि अभी हम पहले कोर्स पूरा कर लें और फिर देन वी विल स्टार्ट. डोंट डू दिस. साइमल्टेनियसली along with your lectures, आप साथ साथ उसे say you are attending say 2.5 hours lecture, at least devote 2 hours on revising the lecture, on learning part. तो essays के अंदर students, तो सबसे बड़ी मैं आपको बात बताने जा रहा हूँ कि essays में understanding part बहुत बड़ा, lot to understand, and your teachers are getting you, they are delivering good lectures, they are making you understand the whole conceptual background they are giving you, and the concept is basically established in your mind, and after the concept gets established in your mind, then you should start checking this, whether you are able to write in the examination. This is very important. When the concept is, yes, the concept is established, but are you able to write in the examination? This is the major question before us, which I will try to answer. Now, each and every, the core thing, core concept, the core concept of how you write the examination is practice, practice, and practice. If you ask me really, practice, practice, and practice. Whatever you are being taught, अगर आप उसे रिवाइज नहीं करोगे, प्रैक्टिस नहीं करोगे उसकी, तो वो फिर आप एग्जामिनेशन हॉल में उसको लिख नहीं पाएंगे. So this is the core thing which I am giving you, that you should practice, practice and practice. Means revision, revision and revision. That is very must. आप कुछ डेफिनेशन पार्ट, डेफिनेशन पोर्शन होता है हर एक ऐसे के अंदर, जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल ऑडिट एविडेंस को डिफाइन किया हुआ. अभी इसी चैप्टर के अंदर ऑडिट रिस्क अभी नैंसी मैडम आपको बता रहे थे, कंट्रोल रिस्क, ऑडिट रिस्क बता रहे थे. तो डेफिनेशन पोर्शन में आप सबको एडवाइज करूंगा स्टूडेंट्स कि आप यू शुड लर्न द डेफिनेशन पार्ट ओनली. लर्निंग बहुत ज्यादा नहीं हो पाती है, अंडरस्टैंड. आप अगर नहीं लर्न करना चाहते, 5 टाइम्स रीड करिए डेली. डेफिनेशन को 5 टाइम्स रीडिंग इज द बेस्ट स्ट्रेटजी, एंड 5 टाइम रीडिंग फॉर 3 consecutive days, 3 दिन लगातार. 5 times reading of a definition for 3 consecutive days. That will become cemented in your mind, I tell you. If it is not cemented for after 3 days, you can make it up to 5 days. 5 days, 5 times reading. 5 days, 5 times reading. Definition portion, whatever definition is, that will get cemented in your mind, I assure you. आप ये टेक्निक करके देख लो, और do not wait much. अभी right now you are having 3.5 months for the examination, और आप इन 3.5 months में अपनी स्टडीज को एक नए लेवल पे, अपने प्रिपरेशन को एक नए लेवल पे ले जा सकते हैं. द काइंड ऑफ टीचर्स यू आर हैविंग. तो ऑडिटिंग को डेली, ऑन डेली बेसिस 3 to 4 hours मस्ट ऐसे पढ़ना ही पढ़ना है, बिकॉज थ्योरेटिकल सब्जेक्ट है, देर से एस्टेब्लिश होता है माइंड, देर से, बिकॉज अकाउंटेंसी आप जल्दी कर, न्यूमेरिकल ओरिएंटेशन. तो इसलिए मैं आपको ये समझा रहा हूं कि आप एसेस के अंदर डेफिनेशन पोर्शन पे सबसे पहले ग्रिप करिए, सबसे पहले, एंड देन यू पिक अप दोस क्वेश्चंस जिसमें पॉइंट्स इन्वॉल्व हैं, जिसमें डायरेक्ट पॉइंट्स लिखे हुए स्टडी मटेरियल. पिक अप दोस क्वेश्चंस फर्स्ट, इन फर्स्ट रन. मैं वो नहीं कह रहा कि आप बाकी क्वेश्चंस छोड़ दो, डू नॉट लीव अदर क्वेश्चंस आल्सो, बट यू फर्स्ट पिक अप दोस क्वेश्चंस इन विच पॉइंट्स आर इन्वॉल्व, एंड ट्राई टू अंडरस्टैंड दोस पॉइंट्स, and then try to memorize that sequence of the points also remains the same in the beginning, in the first round, and again you can do 3 times reading, 4 times reading, 5 times reading of those points, and then that can be done for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, depending on the time you are having. If you are appearing both groups or in single group, then if you are appearing in both groups, then you will be having less time, and if you are appearing in the single group, then you can stretch it up to 5 days. That is very good strategy, I am telling you. So just implement my strategy, what I am sharing with you. Implement these strategies. These definitely where I will keep on coming. I will just testing. You start it from today itself. इसका कोई मुहूर्त नहीं निकलवाना है. From today itself, आज ही शुरू कर दो. देखो आप 5 डेफिनेशन आज ही सब करेंगे. जितने भी स्टूडेंट्स प्रेजेंट है नैंसी, जितने भी स्टूडेंट्स प्रेजेंट है, आज सारे 5 डेफिनेशन उनको आप टास्क दे देना, और नेक्स्ट लेक्चर में हम देखेंगे क्या वो 5 डेफिनेशन उन्होंने 3 दिन तक अगर 5 टाइम्स किए तो उनके माइंड के अंदर सीमेंटेड हो गई. लेट अस स्टार्ट इट फ्रॉम टुडे. डू नॉट वेट कि हम अभी 5 दिन में तैयारी शुरू करेंगे. पुट ऑफ मत करो इधरों को. तो आज मैं आपको यही वाली बिकॉज पॉसिटी ऑफ टाइम इज देयर, तो मैं आपको थोड़ा सा आज ये बताकर फिर थोड़ी सी क्वेरीज लूंगा, आपकी हैंडल करूंगा। स्टूडेंट्स, आप मेरे साथ ही प्रेपरेशन करेंगे। कोई भी आपको डाउट आता है कि सर ने जो समझाया था वो हमें पूरा अच्छी तरह से समझ नहीं है, या उसमें कोई डाउट एम्बिग्यूटी है, यू कैन कॉल मी। मैंने अपने दोनों नंबर शेयर किए हैं। बोर्ड ऑफ स्टडीज देयर फॉर कंप्लीट हैंड होल्डिंग। और कोई भी आपकी प्रॉब्लम है, दैट इज आवर प्रॉब्लम एंड वी विल कंप्लीटली एड्रेस दैट प्रॉब्लम। यस नैंसी, आर देयर क्वेरीज?
Sir, yes, there are 2-3 queries.
Yes, tell me.
So, band ready, the name of the student is band ready, and he is saying that, sir, in ICI website I found section wise weightage. Can
Yes.
I follow that?
Yes, you should follow that, because that weightage is followed while setting the paper. That weightage is followed while setting that. That is very good question. Yes, students, that weightage is, but you should check the weightage after your preparation is over. First you prepare. Preparation, don't compromise while you prepare. You should prepare each and every topic, each and every, I should say, topic religiously, I should say. Sincerely, you should prepare your each and every topic, and you should not compromise on your studies, because 3.5 months are still there. And then you can just have a go through, you can go through the weightage part, how much weightage is assigned to which chapter. That is, but we have divided it very rationally. There is, each topic is, each chapter is being given adequate weightage. This is what I mean to. So you should not focus much on that, right? And you should not make choices after going through the weightage part. कि मैं अब ये छोड़ दूं, अब ये कर लूं, ऐसा मत करना. दैट इज द ब्लंडर. छोड़ना नहीं हमने कुछ भी, हमने तो कंप्लीट 100% सिलेबस को करना है. यस, एनी अदर क्वेरी देयर?
So yes, Hiral, the name of the student is Hiral.
Hiral
He's asking, can we write points in our own words with using key audit words?
Great. That's excellent strategy. Excellent. आप स्टूडेंट्स अपनी लैंग्वेज में लिख सकते. यू कैन राइट इन योर ओन लैंग्वेज, और आप कीवर्ड्स को, पॉइंट्स के अंदर कीवर्ड्स आपके सारे कोई मिस ना हो, बस ये चेक करिए. जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल, अगर कहीं पे डेज लिखे है, कहीं पे 7 years की कंडीशन है, कहीं पे 30 days की कंडीशन है, वो आप उसको मिस ना करिए, वो एज इट इज आ जाए. और जो कीवर्ड्स हैं, कीवर्ड्स जैसे ऑडिट एविडेंस इज द इंफॉर्मेशन यूज्ड बाय द ऑडिटर, तो इंफॉर्मेशन भी आ जाए, यूज्ड बाय द ऑडिटर भी आ जाए. तो वो कीवर्ड्स आपने जो है पकड़ने हैं. ऑडिट रिस्क इज द रिस्क दैट द ऑडिटर मे गिव इनएप्रोप्रिएट जरूर आ जाए उसमें, है ना. तो आप स्टूडेंट्स अपनी लैंग्वेज में ही लिखो. आई डोंट, सिर्फ डेफिनेशन लर्न करने को कह रहा हूं. आई एम नॉट सेइंग टू लर्न ईच एंड एवरी, दैट इज नॉट पॉसिबल. आई एम आस्किंग यू टू लर्न ओनली डेफिनेशन, दैट टू. उसके बाद स्टूडेंट्स क्या होता है, आपके माइंड में वो लैंग्वेज अपने आप चलनी शुरू हो जाती है ऑटोमेटिकली. वंस यू आर कन्वर्जेंट विद द डेफिनेशन पार्ट, then that language automatically makes a circle in your mind, and words automatically, that kind of language automatically comes out of your mind. So this is what I mean to say. आप लैंग्वेज अपनी लिखो, लेकिन आप कमांडेड लैंग्वेज लिखें. आप राइटिंग स्किल्स जो है अपनी, साथ साथ जिन स्टूडेंट्स की राइटिंग स्किल्स साथ साथ इंप्रूव करा करो. एंड दिस इज ए, आई शुड से, कंटिन्यूअस एफर्ट. यू शुड कंटिन्यूअसली improve on your writing skills also, because writing skills आप जो एग्जाम में लिखोगे वही चेक होगा. इसलिए राइटिंग स्किल्स पे भी आपने अपना कंटिन्यूअस फोकस करना है, चाहे दिन में 15 मिनट करो दो. यस, अदर क्वेरीज?
So there is a query. The student's name is Karthik Gupta.
Yes.
So he has asked 3 queries. So the
Yes.
first one is, how should we frame our answers in this subject?
You should frame, yes, this is again very good question, and I will some part of the answer I will give in this lecture, and some part of your query, the answer I will keep on answering your question in almost every lecture. And this is a very good question. जो आप आंसर एग्जाम में लिखोगे, एग्जाम में क्वेश्चन आपका पढ़ना बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है कि आप क्वेश्चंस को कैसे अंडरस्टैंड कर रहे हैं। दैट इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट। नाउ अब आपने क्लियरली आइडेंटिफाई कर लिया कि इसका ये आंसर वहां पे फर्स्ट चैप्टर से क्वेश्चन लिया गया, सेकंड चैप्टर से या थर्ड चैप्टर से क्वेश्चन ऑडिट एविडेंस से लिया गया, और आपको पता है इसमें मेरे पास 5 पॉइंट्स हैं। तो आप 5 पॉइंट्स को 5 पॉइंट्स में ही लिखो, अपनी लैंग्वेज में लिखो, कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं है, और अच्छे से लिखो उनको। मतलब डोंट कंक्लूड इन हरी, आप उनको कम से कम 4 मार्कर क्वेश्चन है तो एटलीस्ट जो इंस्टीट्यूट का पेज है, जितने पॉइंट्स उसमें आपके माइंड में आ रहे हैं उसको आप अच्छे से लिखो, और मेक श्योर कि उसमें कोई चीज मिस ना हो। और कीवर्ड्स, जैसे कि अभी मैंने बताया कि कीवर्ड्स अगर आप अपनी लैंग्वेज में भी लिखते हो, कीवर्ड्स उसमें सारे जरूर आ जाए। तो स्टूडेंट का क्वेश्चन क्या था कि हम पॉइंट्स में लिख सकते हैं।
Sir, he has asked that how to frame our answers, and then the second query is how should I manage to learn the entire syllabus, and third question is how to start writing these concepts on regular basis.
मैं एक एक करके आंसर। पहला क्वेश्चन क्या है उसने पूछा,
how should we frame our answers in this subject?
हाँ, फ्रेम आवर। देखो आंसर्स की फ्रेमिंग क्वेश्चन के हिसाब से होगी। पहले क्वेश्चन का आंसर आपका, you should frame your answers according to the requirement of the question. So what you have to do, you should read the question very carefully. And accordingly you should answer. Maybe the question is paragraph based, answer may be paragraph based, answer may be point based. So that depends on the question being asked in the examination. So वो आंसर फ्रेम करना, ये मैं अभी कॉन्टिन्यूसली इस पे आंसर कैसे फ्रेम करो, कॉन्टिन्यूसली जब भी मैं लेक्चर आपको दूंगा तो मैं बताता रहूंगा। सेकंड क्वेश्चन क्या है इनका?
He is saying that he has understood all the concepts, but how should I manage to retain the concepts?
रिटेन कैसे करें? मैं अभी सबसे पहले मैंने स्टार्ट इसी दोबारा में ये बात मैं जितनी बार भी कहूं, स्टूडेंट्स आप कहीं पे लिख भी लो ये बातें जो मैं बोल रहा हूं। अगर आप इसको लिख के, और वो जो आपने नोटबुक में अपनी कहीं नोट कर लीजिए, जो आपने जहां पे लिखा हुआ है उसको भी बार बार रिवाइज करिए कि सर ने कैसे समझाया था। उससे भी आपको, क्योंकि बिकॉज ये हैबिट बनेगी एक आपकी, और ये हैबिट ऑलमोस्ट हर सब्जेक्ट में, जो थ्योरेटिकल सब्जेक्ट्स हैं उनमें काम आनी है। सो व्हाट यू शुड डू स्टूडेंट्स, अब इनका क्वेश्चन है कि कंसेप्ट को कैसे रिटेन करें।
राइट,
कंसेप्ट को कैसे रिटेन करें ना।
राइट,
हाँ जी
सर यही है क्वेश्चन, यही है।
ओके, अब कंसेप्ट फर्स्ट स्टेप इज कंसेप्ट बिल्डिंग। कंसेप्ट बिल्डिंग तो आपके टीचर्स करा ही रहे। फर्स्ट स्टेप इज कंसेप्ट बिल्डिंग। कंसेप्ट मैंने अभी लेक्चर में हर एक लेक्चर सुनता हूँ, कंसेप्ट बिल्डिंग स्लोली अब कंसेप्ट बिल्डिंग आज हर रोज आप टारगेट करो कि 5 डेफिनेशन मैंने लर्न करनी कुछ हो जाए। अभी आप 4th चैप्टर पे आ चुके, दो तो आप लिख नहीं पाओगे। अभी चैप्टर 4 से ले लो, बिकॉज यू आर कंटिन्यूसली स्टडिंग चैप्टर 4। तो चैप्टर 4 की स्टूडेंट्स आप 5 डेफिनेशंस आप पिकअप कर लो, और 5 डेफिनेशंस को आज ही समझाता हुआ आपने अंडरस्टैंड, यू हैव ऑलरेडी अंडरस्टूड दोस डेफिनेशन, आज ही आप उनको लर्न कर लो। लर्निंग टेक्निक क्या होगी, आप 5 टाइम्स ईच डेफिनेशन को रीड करके छोड़ दो। ईच डेफिनेशन 5 times रीडिंग, ये आपका मंत्रा है। 5, अगर 5 टाइम्स में नहीं बात बन रही फर्स्ट डे, तो आप उसे 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 टाइम्स तक रीड करके आप उसे माइंड, अगर आपसे इकट्ठी बहुत कोई डेफिनेशन होती है विच इज टू लार्ज ए डेफिनेशन, देन ब्रेक इट इनटू पार्ट्स एंड देन रीड इट इन पार्ट्स एंड देन ज्वाइन दोज पार्ट्स। आप अलग अलग कर सकते हैं, 2 पार्ट्स में, 3 पार्ट्स में कर सकते हो, बट करो उसे 10 टाइम्स तक कर सकते हो। एंड ऑलवेज डू दिस एक्सरसाइज वेरी स्लोली, डू नॉट बी इन हरी टू लर्न। जब आप 5 बार रीड कर रहे हो, आपको ये ध्यान रखना है स्टूडेंट्स, आप स्लोली करो बिल्कुल, डोंट बी इन हरी टू डू द थिंग्स, राइट। और आप आज से शुरू कर दो, मैं जब नेक्स्ट लेक्चर में आऊंगा तो आपकी 10-15 डेफिनेशन, मे बी इफ आई कम आफ्टर 2 days और 3 days, तो आपकी 15-20 डेफिनेशन, ताकि आप मुझे सुनाने के काबिल हो जाओ उस लेक्चर के अंदर। अगर मैं पूछूं तो आप अपने दिल पे हाथ रख के कह सको कि हाँ हमने 20 डेफिनेशन तक कर ली। लेट अस बी ट्रूथफुल टू डेफिनेशन का एक रिजर्व, और प्लस जो पॉइंट्स वाले क्वेश्चन हैं, और ये 5 टाइम्स रीडिंग जो करनी है एक डेफिनेशन की, ये 5 दिन तक चलाना है आपने, 5 till 5 days, 5 दिन तक एक डेफिनेशन को आप 5-5 बार रीड करिए। वो डेफिनेशन आपकी 5वें दिन आपको लगेगा कि मैं कभी लाइफ लॉन्ग ही नहीं भूलूंगा, ऐसा लगने लग जाएगा, इतना जबरदस्त सीमेंटेड हो जाता है। और डेफिनेशन जो ही आपके माइंड में 20 डेफिनेशन अगर चले गए, एक बार आपके माइंड में आ गए, तो बस फिर तो ऐसा ऑडिटिंग का साइकिल घूमना शुरू हो जाएगा। साइकिल विल स्टार्ट, इट विल स्टार्ट लाइक साइकिल। आप इतना चेंज अपने आप में फील करेंगे, आप ऑडिटिंग को एंजॉय करना शुरू कर देंगे। लेकिन करना पड़ता है, जस्ट स्टार्ट डूइंग इट टुडे। और इसके लिए आप ये नहीं कि मैं कल से शुरू करूंगा, डोंट पोस्टपोन इट टिल टुमारो, स्टार्ट डूइंग इट टुडे। इसी तरह से 5 डेफिनेशन के साथ, ये तो आपका 1 आवर का काम दिया मैंने आपको। 2 आवर्स हर रोज ऑडिटिंग पढ़ो ही पढ़ो, डिस्पाइट हैविंग क्लास साइमल्टेनियसली अलोंग विद द क्लास। 2 आवर्स तो कम से कम पढ़ो, और जिस दिन आपकी क्लास नहीं है उस दिन आप 4 आवर्स तक लेके जा सकते हो। अभी क्या है, एटलीस्ट टारगेट 3 क्वेश्चंस, पॉइंट मैंने आपको बताया, पॉइंट द क्वेश्चन इन विच द आंसर ऑफ विच रिक्वायर्स points to answer. You have got the points to answer in the question. पॉइंट वाले क्वेश्चन जो है वो पहले पिकअप कर लो आप, जिनमें पॉइंट्स इन्वॉल्व है, उन आंसर्स को आप पिकअप कर लो, उन क्वेश्चंस को पिकअप कर लो, और उन पॉइंट्स को आप 5 टाइम्स रीड करके छोड़ दो, और 3 डेज तक कर लो। आपके वो पॉइंट वाले क्वेश्चन भी ऑटोमेटिकली धीरे धीरे तैयार होने शुरू हो जाएंगे। तो आप 3-4 क्वेश्चन, 3-4 जितने भी आपकी कंफर्ट पर है, आप 4 क्वेश्चन एक दिन में, इस तरह आपके क्वेश्चन भी तैयार होने शुरू हो जाएंगे। और एक दिन आपको लगेगा जैसे में आपके 50 क्वेश्चन हो गए, आफ्टर 12 डेज आपके 50 क्वेश्चन रेडी हो जाएंगे। तो आप साथ साथ अपनी तैयारी शुरू कर दो, एंड डू नॉट वेट। आज से ही आपने तैयारी शुरू करनी है, एंड आई विल कीप ऑन कमिंग एंड असेसिंग यूर हाउ यू आर प्रिपेयरिंग। इसमें आपको दिक्कतें आएंगी, मैं आपको समझाऊंगा, उनके सोल्यूशन भी दूंगा, राइट। और नैन्सी मैडम से आप पूछ सकते हो, मेरे से पूछ सकते हो, फोन पे पूछ सकते हो, एनी 100% आपकी हैंड होल्डिंग होगी, बट आप तैयारी आपने अच्छी करनी है ऑलरेडी। दिस इज व्हाट आई मीन टू से। ये सेकंड क्वेश्चन इनका आंसर किया है। अब इस पे इंप्लीमेंट की जरूरत है। कार्तिक के नाम है ना
सर? कार्तिक गुप्ता।
कार्तिक गुप्ता, आप इसको अब आपको इंप्लीमेंट करने की जरूरत है। जो मैंने आपको बताया, जो टेक्निक बता रहा हूँ, टाइम टेस्टेड टेक्निक्स हैं, आप इंजॉयमेंट करके करिए, और आपको अब इंप्लीमेंट करने की जरूरत है। आज ही इंप्लीमेंट शुरू करो, और फिर मैं आपका रिव्यू साथ साथ करता रहूंगा कि कितना आप कर रहे हो। आप मुझे फोन पे भी बता सकते हो कि सर मैंने इतने डेफिनेशन देखो आज कर रहे हैं, या कितने लर्न हो रहे हैं, कितनी बार रीड करना है। यू कैन कॉल मी एनी टाइम, नो प्रॉब्लम। यस, इनका थर्ड क्वेश्चन भी है।
Yes, sir. So he has written how to start writing these concepts on regular basis so that it doesn't take much time. That's it.
तो आप ये उससे सेकंड क्वेश्चन से लिंक दी है। आप कंसेप्ट, जैसे आपका आप डेफिनेशन 5 टाइम्स रीड करते हो, आफ्टर 5 डेज आपकी काफी सीमेंटेड हो जाएगी. मैंने आपको बोला 5 डेज, 5 टाइम्स रीडिंग फॉर 5 डेज. उसके बाद आप उसे लिख के देखना चाहते हैं, लिख के चेक कर लो एक बार आप. राइट, यही क्वेश्चन है ना इनका?
राइट सर.
कि कैसे लिखें फिर उसे.
राइट.
तो उसके बाद आप एक बार लिख के देखो उसे. पॉइंट्स वाले क्वेश्चन आप जो कर रहे हो, उसके बाद उसके पॉइंट्स लिख के देखो क्या वेदर यू आर एबल टू राइट दोस पॉइंट्स और नॉट. इस तरह साथ साथ ही आपको अपनी तैयारी की असेसमेंट भी साथ साथ होती रहे. यू कैन असेस योर प्रेपरेशंस simultaneously. Is any other queries there?
So Sonika is asking, is a scanner or question bank required for preparation?
Question bank actually जो टॉपिक्स हैं, अभी आप क्वेश्चन बैंक, इफ यू आर आस्किंग फॉर क्वेश्चन बैंक, आप सजेस्टेड आंसर्स पास्ट ईयर क्वेश्चंस May 18 से आपके पास क्वेश्चन है. May 18 वाज द फर्स्ट अटेम्प्ट. May 18 के 2 सजेस्टेड हो गए, फिर 19, 20, 21 एंड 22 का एक हो जाएगा. अभी 21 तक अभी अगर हम गिनते हैं 18, 19, 20, 21, यू हैव गॉट 8 सजेस्टेड आंसर्स जो पास्ट ईयर एग्जामिनेशन क्वेश्चंस. तो उसमें आप वो वाले क्वेश्चंस पिकअप कर सकते हो. आप आरटीपी के पिछले 3-4 आरटीपी उठा सकते हैं. अदरवाइज क्वेश्चंस आप पहले चैप्टर तैयार करो, फिर क्वेश्चन देखो कि आपको आते हैं, वेदर यू आर एबल टू अटेम्प्ट. पहले तैयारी करो. जिसका आंसर ये सोनिका नाम है ना? सोनिका, आपके क्वेश्चन का आंसर, आप पहले फर्स्ट प्रिपेयर एटलीस्ट 10-15 क्वेश्चंस फ्रॉम द मॉड्यूल इटसेल्फ, एंड देन आई विल कीप ऑन कमिंग, आई विल कीप ऑन एड्रेसिंग यू. और फिर मैं आपके जो आपकी क्वेरी, आप सोनिका नाम में याद रखूंगा, और फिर मैं दोबारा से, और कार्तिक का भी, मैं कार्तिक गुप्ता और सोनिका, आपके दोनों के क्वेरीज मैं साइमल्टेनियसली लेता रहूंगा नेक्स्ट लेक्चर के अंदर भी. और आप इस तरह तैयारी करो, शुरू करो. इम्प्लीमेंटेशन इज मस्ट. मेरे ख्याल मैंने काफी टाइम ले लिया. और कोई क्वेरी है तो मैं नेक्स्ट लेक्चर में ले लूं, या अभी कोई है शॉर्ट क्वेरी है तो अभी ले लेता हूँ.
क्वेरीज एज सच नहीं है, बट लाइक प्रभास इज सेइंग that sir, thank you for these techniques, really helpful for all theoretical subjects.
Thank you very much. Thank you. आप इसको implementation, if you are really thankful to me, then I will be happy if you start implementing those techniques, and they will get good results for you. Thank you very much, Nancy. You can carry on with your lecture.
So thank you for your advice, for sharing the wisdom. I am sure that students are going to benefit from all your words. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So students, now back to our chapter. I hope you all are going to actually implement what sir have told you, and I'm sure that these techniques are definitely going to help you in all the subjects. Okay? So you can note all your queries as and when sir will be interacting with you in the next sessions. You all can discuss your queries with sir. Okay? So now back to our chapter, and we were discussing about testing of internal control, whereby we were discussing the IT environment in internal control. So only 3 points are left. I'll do one thing. I'll cover up these 3 points, and then we will take a 10-minute short break. But first, let us just cover this topic. So what we were doing now, why to understand. We have already understood and evaluated the internal control. Now we were testing the actual operation of the internal controls. Okay? So we saw that inspection, inquiry, observation, re-performance, all those can be done. Then we came to the topic with respect to internal control and IT environment, whereby we saw that internal control of an entity can be a mix of manual elements as well as IT environment, automated elements. So just a minute. So what are the, just a minute. What are the benefits and the disadvantages related to IT environment we have done? Now 3 points are left, which says that with respect to suitability, it says that with respect to various things, for example, where judgment or discretion is required, so their manual element is going to be more effective. For example, if credit worthiness, let's say in case of a bank, if credit worthiness of the person seeking the loan is required, then maybe the manual elements in internal control are required, because the judgment and discretion is required here. But yes, manual control have their own limitations. Why? Because there can be errors, there can be mistake, they can be, overridden by the management. So the nature of the entity's information system is going to impact the control risk of an organization, which the auditor has to consider. Okay. So with this, we have covered the topic of testing of internal control. So we will do one thing, we will take a break of 10 minutes here, and then after the break, we have a number of topics to cover. So be back after a break of 10 minutes and keep on posting your queries. Okay. So also let me know whether you have understood or not, and we will take a break of 10 minutes here. So students, I hope you all are back after the break. And students, whatever your doubts are left, you can always ask them in the next session. As in when sir will be coming, you can just note them down and you can ask the queries. Okay? So Rahul is asking me to repeat point number 3rd and 4th. So Rahul, the point number 3rd and 4th with respect to what? Quickly send in which point number 3 and 4. So meanwhile, let us start with the next topic, which is materiality and audit risk. So materiality, you all have done S8 320. Quickly send in as to what is the name of this S8 320 related to materiality. Send in your answers. Send in your answers, please. So see, materiality. So an auditor considers materiality while he is planning, while he is performing the audit, while he is evaluating the effect of identified misstatements, whether these are material or not, and when he is forming an opinion. So materiality is to be considered throughout the process of audit, planning, performing, evaluating the effect of identified misstatement, and then forming an opinion, right? Now, what is the overall objective of an auditor? So the overall objective of an auditor is to obtain a reasonable assurance as to whether the financial statements are free from material misstatement, and how to obtain reasonable assurance by obtaining sufficient and appropriate audit evidence, by so as to reduce audit risk to an acceptably low level. Okay? So we can see that materiality and audit risk, these two concepts, auditor will keep in mind throughout the process of audit. He will keep both the concept in his mind that audit risk should be reduced to an acceptably low level. Why? Because reasonable assurance to chahiye in audit mein, right? And materiality. Why? Because he has to give an opinion that financial statement as a whole are free from material misstatement, right? So I can conclude it by saying that materiality and audit risk, the auditor considers both the concept when he is identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement, when he is deciding the nature, timing, extent of audit procedures, right? When the auditor is evaluating the effect of uncorrected misstatement, and when the auditor is giving his opinion. So the concept of materiality and audit risk will remain in the mind of the auditor throughout the process of auditing. So this was the concept, which is very simple. And yes, many of you have correctly answered that the name of S8 320 is materiality in planning and performing an audit. So start learning right now, as sir has suggested, and the homework that sir has given you. So before I forgot, let me just tell you, with respect to audit risk, there are 5 definitions: audit risk, inherent risk, risk of material misstatement, control risk, and detection risk. So for the homework for you is to follow the technique which sir has asked you with respect to these 5 definitions. Okay? Okay? So I have given you the homework. The telephone numbers and email ID I'll be sharing at the end of the session. Okay? Now students, tell me whatever we have studied in this chapter with respect to identification and assessment of risk of material misstatement, with respect to internal controls, everything. Is there a requirement to document each and everything? Quickly send in your replies, yes or no, because we need to consider very important concepts. Abhi. Send in your reply, yes or no. Documentation karna hai ya nahi? Kya lagta hai? You have studied at least 12-13 essays so far. 9 essays are there in chapter number 3. Then in chapter number 2 also you have gone through 4 essays. 13 to hui gaye, hai na? Then in chapter number 1 there are 2 essays. Hai na? So tell me, documentation part you must have understood with respect to each and every essay. So tell me, whatever we have studied in this chapter with respect to internal control, audit risk, each and everything, is there a requirement to document the same? So Siddharth is saying no, yes. Viral is saying yes. Sneha is saying yes, and Nikita is saying yes. So the answer is yes. Okay? So whatever working has been done, it should be based on document. It should be documented. You all have done essay 230 and you all know what are the benefits of documenting each and everything in the process of auditing. Okay? So yes, there is a need of documentation. Akash Neel has mentioned that, ma'am, there is a need of documentation. So what all documentation is required? Auditor will document the discussion among the engagement team and the significant decisions reached. Simple. Then whatever are the key elements of understanding obtained regarding entity and its environment, the sources of information, the internal control components, the risk assessment procedures performed. Everything will be documented now. Then identified and assessed risk of material misstatement at both the levels, financial statement level, assertion level, and last but not the least, the risk identified and related controls about which auditor has obtained an understanding. That is all the relevant controls that auditor has obtained. Very simple. Okay, very simple, na? So each and everything is required to be documented. Now, next topic, which is what? Internal audit. So, just a minute. So, students, now let us try to understand the concept of internal audit. Now, we are not talking about, first of all, what is this topic? Internal audit. Okay? So, first of all, keep one thing in mind before understanding this topic, that we are not talking about statutory audit here. We are not talking about any external audit here, which we were discussing so far. But now, with respect to this topic, we are not discussing statutory audit. So, we, except for this line, let me just tell you one line with respect to statutory audit. What is the overall objective? Like, why statutory audit is being conducted? Because statutory auditor has to give an opinion. ठीक है? Auditor को क्या देना है? Opinion. But we are not talking about this opinion. We are not talking about statutory audit here. ठीक है? We are talking about what? Internal audit. ठीक है? इतना क्लियर है? तो अब statutory audit से कंफ्यूज नहीं होना है हमको. ठीक है? Now, let me just suppose this is the HR function. This is the entity. This is the HR function. This is the finance function of an organization. This is, let's say, the production function. And let's say this is the internal audit department of the organization. So as all these are what? Management functions. All these are what? Management functions. मैनेजमेंट ही तो करता है ना ये सब, डेलीगेट कर सकता है, खुद से कर सकता है, एचआर फंक्शन, फाइनेंस फंक्शन, प्रोडक्शन. सेम वे इंटरनल ऑडिट इज आल्सो वन ऑफ द मैनेजमेंट फंक्शंस, है ना? मैनेजमेंट का फंक्शन है. आई एम सेइंग दिस अगेन एंड अगेन. आई एम नॉट टॉकिंग अबाउट दिस थिंग. आई एम नॉट टॉकिंग अबाउट दिस थिंग, है ना? I'm talking about internal audit department, and this is a management function like any other function in an entity. ठीक है? But since this is audit, so this is an independent management function. Audit है, independence तो आ ही जाएगा ना. मैनेजमेंट फंक्शन. ठीक है? And further, I told you that students, we are not discussing about statutory audit. Also, we are not discussing about what? This opinion. Why? Because opinion to statutory auditor will give, na? This work of giving an opinion is given to whom? Statutory auditor. So, jab we are not talking about statutory auditor, we are also not talking about the opinion. So, what will an internal auditor do? He will give suggestions. For what? For improvements. He will give suggestions for risk management. He will give suggestions for what? Overall governance mechanism. है ना? Opinion नहीं मांगा internal auditor से. Why? Because for opinion we have statutory auditor ना. तो अभी we are not discussing statutory auditor. अभी तो हम internal audit को discuss कर रहे हैं. So first of all, you have understood, like any other management function, internal audit is also one of the management functions. And since audit है तो that we to know that it is what? An independent examination. So independent management function. Why? To give an opinion? No. To give suggestions, to give improvements. So before the external auditor comes, management may feel, or there may be a requirement given by the Companies Act, which we'll be discussing, section 138, that before external party comes, that is external auditor comes now, internal auditor, you also do some checking. Hana? You also do certain checkings. And if you find any discrepancies, any deviations, then please give us suggestions for improvement. Us matlab the management. Okay? So internal audit, let us just have a look at the definition. Keep in mind that it is a management function, independent hai. What is the purpose? Ki suggestions dene hai, improvements dene hai, for improvements in various areas. What are those areas? We will discuss. Opinion nahi bola hai. Statutory auditor will give an opinion. Okay? Thereafter, we'll discuss section 138. Now, let us have a look at the definition. So, just a minute. So, as defined in the scope of standards on internal audit, standards on internal audit. Abhi aage aayega, you will see what all are the standards on internal audit. Internal audit means an independent management function. Like any other function of the management, I told you what management function hai, but yes, it is independent. ठीक है, which involves continuous and critical appraisal. Audit है तो evaluation तो करेंगे ना, critical evaluation, assessment or appraisal, okay, of what? Of functioning of an entity with a view to suggest improvements. Audit वाला work तो करना ही है, independence तो होगी, but what is the purpose here? To suggest improvements and add value to and strengthen what all? The overall governance mechanism. Governance is what? The way a company is controlled. है ना? उसमें कुछ improvement suggest करना है, उसको और strong बनाना है. Who will do that? Internal auditor. Including entities, strategic risk management and internal control system. Hana? So let us just read this definition again. Independent management function. As I told you that if the definition is lengthy, try to break it up in parts. So the first one is what? Independent management function, which involves what? Continuous and critical appraisal of what? Of functioning of the entity. Why? To suggest improvements, okay, and value to and strengthen what? The overall governance mechanism of the entity, including the entity strategic risk management and internal control system. तो अभी opinion तो आपको कहीं नहीं मिला है ना? Opinion word आया कहीं? लेकिन when we discussed about statutory audit in our chapter number 1, the last line used to say to express an opinion thereon. है ना? तो specific purpose, the end result was what? To express an opinion. And here the end result is what? To give suggestions for improvement with respect to overall governance mechanism, entities risk management, and internal control system. See, Sri Nagalakshmi, that is why the word independent has been mentioned. Okay? So I hope Sri Nagalakshmi, your doubt is clear. Now, which are the companies that are compulsorily required by the Companies Act 2013 to have to appoint an internal auditor? So Section 138 of the Companies Act, it is mentioned that with respect to such class of companies as may be prescribed, the companies are required to appoint an internal auditor or a firm of internal auditors, and where it has been prescribed in rules. Rule number 13 of Companies Accounts Rules 2014. Okay? So what all companies are required to mandatorily have an internal auditor or an internal audit department? So every listed company should have an internal auditor. Okay? Clear hai, simple hai. Every unlisted company, but there are certain criteria. And students, you will see that all these criteria, 4 criteria are there. These are joined using the connecting word or. That means if any of these conditions is satisfied, then such unlisted public company will have to appoint an internal auditor. Okay? So what are those criteria? First of all, if the paid up share capital of that company is more than equal to 50 crores during the preceding financial year. If during the preceding financial year, the paid up share capital of the company is more than 50 crores, then in this year, the company needs to have what? An internal auditor. Hana? See, why preceding financial year? Because abhi, suppose this year is going on. So abhi, how would I know that on 31st March, what would be the paid up share capital? But last year ka to pata hoga na. So that is why preceding financial year mein paid up share capital, if it is more than 50 crores or equal to or more than 50 crores, then in the next year, the company is required to have to appoint an internal auditor. Clear? Or if the turnover of the company is more than equal to 200 crores during the preceding financial year. If at the end, 31st March of the preceding year, the turnover is more than equal to 200 crores, then the company is required to appoint an internal auditor in this year. Okay? Or if the outstanding loans or borrowings from banks or financial institution exceeds 100 crore or more at any point of time during the preceding financial year. So it might happen that during the year, though it has exceeded 100 crores, but then the company has repaid it. And as on 31st March, it is, let's say it has repaid 10 crores. So it is only 90 crores. So that is why at any point of time, if the loans and borrowings outstanding from bank or public financial institution, it exceeds rupees 100 crores, then the companies, at any point of time during the preceding year, then the company is required to appoint an internal auditor in this year. Same way, the 4th clause, and again it is connected by or, outstanding deposits of more than equal to 25 crores. 25 crores or more, again at any point of time during the preceding financial year. And here also the reason is the same. It might be possible that the company has the outstanding deposit exceed, let's say 30 crores during the year, and 5 crore has been repaid. Okay? Or 6 crores have been repaid. So at the end, it is only 29 crores now. So that is why the word that has been used is at any point of time during the preceding financial year. Why preceding financial year? Because as in this current year, we are aware about the financials, the figures of paid up share capital, of turnover, outstanding loans and outstanding deposits of the preceding financial year ना, इस year के तो भी transactions होने हैं ना, so that is why of the preceding financial year. So what we are doing, section 138, which says that with respect to these class of companies, where are these class of company mentioned in rule 13 of companies accounts rule 2014. So it says every listed company, they need to have what? An internal audit department. Every unlisted public company, if the paid up share capital is more than equal to 50 crores in the preceding financial year, turnover, or the turnover is more than equal to 200 crores in the preceding financial year, outstanding loans and borrowings from public financial institution or banks exceed 100 crores or more at any point of time during the preceding financial year, or outstanding deposits of 25 crores or more at any point of time during the preceding financial year, then if any of these criteria is met, the unlisted public company need to have an internal audit department the next year. And the third criteria is for every private company, and you will see that these two things, these 2 points relating to turnover and outstanding loan, these are taken as it is here. So public deposits तो होंगे ही नहीं with respect to private company, and share capital का exemption has been given. So with respect to turnover and outstanding, if it exceeds 200 crore or more, and with respect to loan, if it exceeds what? 100 crore or more than 100 crore. ठीक है? So the company needs to have what? An internal audit department. And internal audit का क्या काम है? We have seen that it is an independent. Why audit है? Independent तो करना ही है. Management function, which involves continuous and critical appraisal of functioning of the entity with a view to suggest improvements. Opinion नहीं आएगा इस definition में. ठीक है? ठीक है. Now, the next question arises as to who can be appointed as an internal auditor. So, a chartered accountant can be appointed as an internal auditor. Now I told you that I am not talking about statutory auditor. ठीक है? अभी हम internal auditor की बात कर रहे हैं. A cost accountant can also be appointed as an internal auditor, or any other professional as decided by the board, as the board of director considers. So any other professional can also be appointed as an internal auditor depending upon the requirement of the organization. है ना? So a chartered accountant or a cost accountant or any other professional as decided by the board, and CA or the cost audit whether engaged in practice or not. ठीक है? So any qualified chartered accountant, the company, or cost accountant, the company can appoint them, or the company can appoint a firm of auditors or a proprietorship firm of a person as an internal auditor. ठीक है? Further, students, if you remember, I made this diagram here that like these are what management function. तो यहाँ पर अगर HR department में GM HRD है, तो he is what employee of the company ना, है ना? Same way finance में भी जो accountant है, he is an employee of the company. So internal auditor can also be an employee of the company, है ना? So the company may appoint the internal auditor who is an employee of the company itself, या the company may outsource the internal audit function to any firm of chartered accountants. It can be any ways. And further, the internal audit department, it depends upon the size, the nature, the complexity of the organization, the entity. It can be a 1 person or it can be a team of 10 person, but it should be commensurate. It should be as per the size, as per the requirements of the organization. Okay? So I hope it is clear. I hope this is clear. So Radhika, that is not possible. A person who is internal auditor cannot be appointed as a statutory auditor. So I'll clear your doubt here only. Rest in chapter number 10, we will be discussing all these things in detail. Okay? So I hope this is clear. ठीक है. So who can be appointed? Now what is internal audit function? You can just go through it. It is almost same as the definition of internal audit. It has been derived from there only. Now essay 610, the name of the essay is using the work of an internal auditor. So as such, it is not in detail in your syllabus, but it says that a statutory auditor, he can use the work of an internal auditor. ठीक है. But before understanding as to what work can be used by a statutory auditor, first let us discuss what all is the work of internal auditor. उसको करना क्या क्या है, ठीक है. So the activities of the internal auditor can be bifurcated into three parts, which is what? Activities relating to governance, activities relating to risk management, and activities related to internal control. These are derived from the definition itself. ठीक है, डेफिनेशन से ही तो आ रहा है ना ये. ठीक है. नाउ लेट अस हैव अ लुक एट दीज थ्री काइंड्स ऑफ डेफिनेशन. एक्टिविटीज रिलेटिंग टू गवर्नेंस. गवर्नेंस इज व्हाट? हाउ अ कंपनी इज कंट्रोल्ड. So internal auditor, see, he needs to give suggestions to improve, to strengthen the governance of an organization. And what all is included in governance? The communication of risk, है ना? The control of information, the risk and control information to appropriate areas, the effectiveness of communication among those charged with governance with external, internal auditors and management, the performance management accountability, objectives of ethics and values, है ना? So whatever is included in governance of an organization, so the internal audit function has to assess that governance process. The internal audit department has to assess the governance process, whether it is appropriate or not in achieving the objectives related to what? Ethics, relating to performance management, accountability, communicating risk and control information, effectiveness of communication between TCWG, those charged with governance, with external, internal auditors and management. कहीं ओपिनियन नहीं आया ना, क्योंकि ओपिनियन का काम किसको दे दिया है? स्टैट्यूटरी ऑडिटर को. तो कोई सजेस्ट भी तो करेगा ना इंप्रूवमेंट्स के लिए. कौन करेगा? इंटरनल ऑडिटर. ठीक है. नाउ विद रिस्पेक्ट टू रिस्क, सिंपल है रिस्क को आइडेंटिफाई करना. इफ यू रिमेंबर स्टूडेंट्स, व्हेन वी वर डिस्कसिंग the components of internal control, you saw there was what? Entities risk assessment process. तो यही तो है एंटिटी का रिस्क असेसमेंट प्रोसेस कि इंटरनल ऑडिटर को भी इन्वॉल्व किया हुआ है ना. सो बिफोर द स्टैट्यूटरी ऑडिटर कम्स इनटू पिक्चर, द मैनेजमेंट विल आस्क द इंटरनल ऑडिट डिपार्टमेंट दैट इंटरनल ऑडिट डिपार्टमेंट, लिसन, रिस्क मैनेज करो ना, आइडेंटिफाई करो, इवैल्यूएट करो एंड सजेस्ट अस गिव अस सजेशंस फॉर इम्प्रूवमेंट, है ना. हेल्प अस टू डिटेक्ट द फ्रॉड. है तो ऑडिट ही ना, बस इंटरनल डिपार्टमेंट है. ठीक है. देन एक्टिविटीज रिलेटेड टू इंटरनल कंट्रोल. सो व्हाटएवर इंटरनल कंट्रोल इज रिक्वायर्ड टू डू, वो सब इंटरनल ऑडिटर विल सी कि वो इंटरनल कंट्रोल ठीक से कर रहा है या नहीं. तो लेट्स सी हाउ. सो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल तो ही विल बी इवैल्यूएटिंग इंटरनल कंट्रोल. बिफोर external auditor evaluates na, management will ask internal auditor that listen internal auditor, you also evaluate na quality ठीक है या नहीं. नहीं है तो suggest us improvement, give us suggestions for improvement, है ना. Then see internal control का क्या work होता है? एक financial and operating information को process करना, operating activities पर implement होता है, compliance with laws and regulations होता है. So the internal audit department will examine all these, whether internal control is able to achieve all these or not, है ना. So internal auditor, what he will do, he will evaluate the internal control. He will evaluate the financial and operating information processing. He will evaluate he will review what the operating activities with respect to what, whether they are economy, effectiveness, efficiency, ये सब चेक करेगा. ठीक है. And the internal audit department, with respect to internal control, it has a function to what? Review the compliance with laws and regulations. Simple है. Once you have understood the definition of internal audit, now you have learned it, then see these, तो you can derive from the definition itself. ये क्या क्या है? देखो, governance है, रिस्क मैनेजमेंट है, इंटरनल कंट्रोल है. नाउ लेट अस गो बैक टू द डेफिनेशन. क्या था? व्हाट वाज द डेफिनेशन? इट वाज, लेट मी जस्ट change my pen just a minute. So it was what? See, governance mechanism, ठीक है. Then entities risk management, just a minute, ठीक है. रिस्क मैनेजमेंट था और इंटरनल कंट्रोल था. सो इसी से रिलेटेड एक्टिविटी तो करना है ना. सो द इंटरनल ऑडिट फंक्शन, वेरी सिंपल, यू कैन जस्ट गो थ्रू these are very very simple, ठीक है. And we have seen that who all are required to have an internal audit department in terms of section 138 of the Companies Act, ठीक है. Now there was a reference to standards on internal audit, if you remember. So the definition of internal audit, so it was mentioned there as defined in the scope of standards on internal audit. So what are these? So these are as such not in detail in your syllabus, but the our institute, it has constituted a committee on internal audit, and it is now called what? Internal Audit Standard Board. So far these standards on internal audit have been issued. So you can just go through the names, only these are mentioned in the module, so these are not as such in detail, ठीक है. Yes, Shri Nagalakshmi, there is always a communication between the internal auditor and the statutory auditor, ठीक है. So any other doubt? So Bharat, if a public company, unlisted public company, they have taken deposits from the public, है ना. So chapter 5 is there of the Companies Act and section 73 onwards, है ना. So with respect to those deposits, if they exceed 25 crores or more at any point of time during the year, then the company is required to have what? The internal audit function. Why at any point of time during the year? Because I've told you, sorry, with respect, 25 crores or more. Why at any point of time? Because it might be possible that during the year, 30 crores were there, but they have repaid 6 crores before 31st March. So 31st March, they have repaid, let's say 10 crores. Hana? So it is at any point of time during the year. Okay? So if even for a single day, if it exceeds, if it is equal to more than 25 crores, then the company is required to constitute an internal audit department or to appoint an internal auditor. Clear? Whose query was this? You can just go through these CRs once, the standards on internal audit. Okay? So as such, these are not in detail, right? So send in your queries if anyone is having any queries. Shri Nagalakshmi, your doubt is not clear, so please send it again. So we discussed what? Internal audit function, whereby we saw that it is an independent management function, but opinion nahi dena आपको. क्या करना है? Suggestions देना with respect to risk management, governance, internal control. ठीक है? And activities are related to these 3 areas only. And yes, there will be communication between internal auditors and statutory auditors. Statutory auditor can use the work of the internal auditor and they can take their assistance. Please help us in this work. There is SA 610, which is as such not in detail. Okay? So what was the name of the essay? Using the work of internal auditor. If you can just have a look, it is mentioned here. Okay? So Hitesh, the answer to your query is no. It is specifically mentioned a chartered accountant, cost accountant, or other professional. So listen to me. If the board thinks that the qualification that you have mentioned is apt for the organization, he may be appointed as an internal auditor. ठीक है? ठीक है? खुशी और query will be answered when we will be doing chapter number 10. ठीक है? Now the next topic is what? Internal financial control and reporting requirements. Internal financial control and reporting requirements. So first of all, let us try to understand what is internal financial control. Now we are back to our statutory auditor. ठीक है? Internal audit हो गया. Now we are back to our statutory auditor. So this reporting requirement is with respect to what? Statutory auditor now. So first of all, what is internal financial control? So in a very simple term, I can say the internal control related to the financial reporting are what? The internal financial control. But the definition of internal financial control has been given in section 134, subsection 5, clause E of the Companies Act 2013, and it says that internal financial control refer to the policies and procedures adopted by the company. Okay, for what? For orderly and efficient conduct of its business, including adherence to company's policies, safeguarding of assets, prevention and detection of frauds and errors, adequacy and completeness of accounting records, and timely preparation of reliable financial information. So basically the internal control, the policies and procedures which are adopted by the company to ensure various things. What are those various things? Let us look them at again point-wise. Orderly and efficient conduct of business, including adherence, that is company policies are followed, being followed. Adherence is adhered to, they are followed. Safeguarding of assets, prevention and detection of fraud and error, accuracy and completeness of accounting records, and timely preparation of reliable financial information. So a company will implement internal financial controls, specifically for these purposes, and these are defined in the Act in section 134, subsection 5, clause E of the Companies Act 2013. Is it clear? If you just have a look now, this definition is almost similar to internal control, or whatever you have studied abhi tak na ki internal control ka what is the role, what is the purpose of internal control, but more specifically with respect to finances of the company, what internal controls are implemented, why controls are implemented, this definition covers all that thing. ठीक है? Clear? Clear? Now there is a reporting responsibility on the auditor. Now you might say that, ma'am, with respect to internal controls, you were saying again and again that there is no reporting responsibility on the statutory auditor to report on the internal control. Now why this topic is mentioned? So if you remember, we have discussed a point. Let me just take you back to that point. Just a minute. When the auditor, we did the topic of understanding the nature and extent of understanding the internal control. Thereby we saw that design को समझना है, implementation को समझना है, manual control का अलग पढ़ा था, है ना? And there was a last point. Let me just show it to you. See, this was the topic. What was the topic? The controls relevant to audit. Sorry, it is in this topic, controls relevant to audit. And thereby we saw कि controls to be relevant है कब तक होंगे. For example, safeguarding of assets में we saw कि cash के ऊपर है, then it is relevant. However, if it is related to preventing the excessive uses of material in production, it may not to be relevant. है ना? Same way, we saw that the statute may require the auditor to report on compliance with certain internal controls. Whereby I told you we will be covering this in section 143, subsection 3, clause I. So now the time has come. term that we are covering that section. So section 143 subsection 3 clause I, it imposes a responsibility on the auditor to report on the internal financial control over financial reporting. So let me just take that page. So section 143 subsection 3 clause I, it requires the auditor report to state whether the company has adequate internal financial control in place and operating effectiveness of such control. See students, when these provisions were not there, and in fact, let me just tell you one more thing, that the company's accounts rule 2014, rule number 8, it also requires the board's report of all the companies to state in detail in respect of adequacy of internal financial control. So earlier, when these provisions were not there, that there was no requirement that something with respect to adequacy of internal financial control is to be mentioned in the director's report, or when there was no requirement for the auditor also to report in his to give it in his report. So why these provisions were introduced? Because there used to be fraud, scams in the companies. Now, whom should be held responsible? So there were changes made in the Companies Act whereby the responsibility was given on the directors of the company, that directors of the company, you need to mention in your board's report that whether the internal financial control are adequate or not. So you will be held responsible if later on any fraud on account of internal financial control comes out. Same way, a responsibility on the auditor, that auditor, you now have to check the internal financial control separately and you need to give a separate opinion. So section 143 subsection 3 clause I, it requires the auditor to report on the adequacy of internal financial control over the financial reporting. So what is required? The auditor is required to express an opinion on the effectiveness of company's internal financial control over financial reporting. So with respect to financial reporting only, the auditor has to give his opinion with respect to effectiveness of IFC. So IFC we have seen बहुत broad है ना. See, look at the definition. क्या था? बहुत कुछ था ना. Companies policy, safeguarding of asset, prevention, detection of frauds, accuracy, completeness of records, preparation and reliable financial information. So section 143 subsection 3 clause I says that with respect to IFC on financial reporting, give your opinion separately. Okay? So this is the requirement on the board. And then the last topic of this chapter as to what is the difference between internal financial control. So internal financial control kya hai? It is a broader term na, which has been defined in the act, in the Companies Act itself, section 134 subsection 5 clause E, that policies and procedures jo ye sare kaam karti hai. So it is a broader term. Out of that, internal financial control over financial reporting, the auditor has to give an opinion. तो पूरे IFC पर तो opinion नहीं देना है ना. Auditor needs to give an opinion on what? Internal controls over financial reporting. That is, over the financial reporting only he has to give his opinion. ठीक है? So I hope this is also clear. IFC is what? It is defined in the Companies Act itself. That policies and procedures adopted by the company for ensuring various things. Internal control over financial reporting, it is as such not defined in the act. It is mentioned where? In a guidance note issued by our institute, whereby the responsibility has been given on the auditor to express a separate opinion. Okay? So is it clear? Is it clear? So with this, we have finished our chapter. I'll do one thing. I'll quickly take a look at all your queries and then I'll resolve them. And we will quickly, after the queries, we will quickly revise the entire chapter. And students, this revision, if you remember, I told you about Parth. He was a regular child and he used to attend the entire session, and he always used to ask for the summarization of the chapters. And today also he has mentioned in his comments that all these techniques, all these summaries have helped him in getting 67 marks in auditing and assurance subject and in getting a rank, 15th rank. So students, be with me, have patience. We will quickly revise the important topics as the time will permit, and then we will try to cover up the questions that were left in the last session. So let me first have a look at your queries and quickly send in your post in your replies as to whether you have understood this chapter or not. See, understanding हो गया है ना, तो उसके बाद you can just go through this chapter once, twice, thrice, whatever you require, है ना? And then start learning the definitions, the keywords, and then, as sir said, you can always use your language. But yes, some commanded language is to be used. The keywords are to be used. Okay? So first of all, tell me whether you have understood or not. So Hiran, examination is always in detail, Hana? Is it clear to you, your query? No, Karthik, you cannot say that IF is part of that thing. These are separate concepts. So, Hitesh, I hope your query is clear. Okay. So now let us just quickly go through this chapter in 10 minutes. A quick revision, which is, I'm 100% sure this revision is going to help you a lot. Okay. So we started our chapter with what? Audit risk. Be with me. For all those who have gone through the module, they will be able to, revise the entire chapter with ease. Anna. And if any doubt is still left, you can send in your query so that side by side, as and when the topic will come, we will revise that. So we saw that audit risk is the risk that auditor gives an inappropriate opinion when the financial statements are materially misstated. So the opposite of it, that when financial statements are not materially misstated and auditor gives an opinion that they are materially misstated, that is not audit risk. Why? Because that is ordinarily insignificant. Further, audit risk is what? A technical term related to process of auditing. So business risk of the audit firm, like loss of litigation or adverse publicity, those are also not audit risk. Okay? Then audit risk is a function of risk of material misstatement and detection risk. Risk of material misstatement is what? Any risk that the financial statement are materially misstated prior to audit se pehle, or and risk of material misstatement is a function of inherent risk and control risk. Okay? Inherent risk and control risk, we have discussed that it is on the part of management. Auditor can only identify and assess it. Auditor cannot reduce it. But yes, detection risk, auditor can frame it, auditor can control it. So when the risk of material misstatement is high, auditor will try to bring the detection risk at low so that he can keep audit risk to an acceptably low level. Inherent risk kya hota hai? Susceptibility. That is the chances of getting affected of an assertion to a material misstatement before consideration of related controls. So inherent risk kya hota hai? Inbuilt risk. By the very nature of the financial statement, वो risky है. ठीक है? Auditor cannot do anything for that. Control risk is, what is the risk? That an internal control will not be able to prevent or detect and correct a material misstatement. Okay? And it is again in the hands of whom? The management who implements the internal control. So, assessment of risk of material misstatement is a matter of professional judgment, not capable of precise measurement. Accurate measure नहीं कर सकते हो, professional judgment है. Very important, what is not included in audit risk. And in fact, the homework for you which was given by sir is to learn the 5 definitions which we have covered. 4 we have covered. Now with respect to the 5th one is detection risk, which we'll be covering. Then risk of material misstatement is to be considered at 2 levels: financial statement level and assertion level. Financial statement is level is that whether it is affecting the financial statement as a whole or potentially affecting many assertion. I gave example of using the wrong foreign exchange rate. Then assertion level is to a particular class of item. Why? In order to see what should be the nature, timing, extent of audit procedure. What audit evidence is to be obtained with respect to that particular assertion in order to express an opinion so as to reduce the risk, audit risk to an acceptably low level. Inherent risk, you all know. Control risk, you all know. Based on the assessment of control risk, auditor will decide as to whether or not to rely on controls. Okay? Whether to rely or not to rely on control. And if he finds that, suppose he assesses that he will rely, but later on he finds that controls are not so effective, then he may revise his assessment to not to rely. And he needs to consider all the controls which are there on a particular assertion. If one of the control is not effective, however, rest are effective, then he may choose to rely on the internal control. Okay? If any deficiencies are identified, then he'll see that with respect to relevant assertion, whether there are other controls also which are compensating the ineffective control. If they are compensating for it, he may rely. If they are not compensating for it, he may not rely. He may revise his assessment. SA 315 requires the auditor to do a combined assessment of risk of material misstatement. If you remember, the name of the essay is identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement. So basically this paragraph says that auditor needs to assess the risk, the technique or the methods he may follow, whatever methods or techniques he may follow. The thing is that the end result should be an identification assessment of risk of material misstatement. So with this, we saw that audit risk is equal to inherent risk, control risk, and detection risk. Detection risk is the risk that the procedures that the auditor will perform to bring audit risk to an acceptably low level, those procedures will not detect a misstatement that exists. And see, this line is almost in all the risks that could be material either individually or when aggregated with other misstatement. Okay? Then I have told you to go through this example. This perfectly explains the difference between inherent risk, control risk, and detection risk. Now, SA 315, identifying and assessing the risk of material misstatement through understanding the entity and its environment. ठीक है? Identify, assess किस पे करना है? Financial statement level पे भी, assertion level पे भी. What will be the process? First of all, identify करना है. Then assess. Identify is discover करना है. Then assess is evaluate कि potentially कितना effect कर रहा है on the financial statement as a whole. Then the third step is what can go wrong at a particular assertion level after considering related control. क्योंकि हो सकता है ना that risk तो है, but related control भी है. So therefore nothing can go wrong. Okay, so auditor has to consider, and then what is the likelihood that all the misstatements will result in a material misstatement. Risk assessment procedures, the name of the SA 315 as it is, the audit procedures performed to obtain an understanding of entity, its environment, including internal control, to identify and assess risk of material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error at financial statement assertion level. What all risk assessment procedures auditor can perform? He can acquire, he can perform analytical procedure, observation, and inspection. Okay? Now, understanding is a continuous process, and what are the benefits when an auditor understands an entity? He's in a position, it helps him in assessing the risk of material misstatement. It helps in determining materiality, in considering the appropriateness of accounting policies, in identifying areas of special audit consideration like going concern. Okay? Developing expectation when using analytical procedure. I gave you example that auditor may develop an expectation that based on the past trend, based on the industry, the GP should be 10%. Then he can check it with the actual, and it will help in evaluating the sufficiency, appropriateness of audit evidence and the management oral and written representation. Okay? What information is required? You have done in detail in chapter number 2. External, first is external, industry, regulatory, other factors applicable FRF. Then internal, nature, operations, governance structure, type of investments, how the company is financed. Then accounting policy is consistent hai nahi, appropriate hai nahi, as per FRF, as per industry. Then ORS, objectives, risk and strategies. And last but not the least, the measurement and review of entities' financial performance. So CR, yes, Karthik, control risk is a function of what? Design, implementation and maintenance of what? The internal control. See, it is not mentioned that control risk means. Control risk, see, let me just show it to you. Because this was a query of one more student. So control risk is the function of effectiveness of design, implementation, maintenance of internal control by the management. Hana? Why? Because if the internal controls are effective, the control risks are going to be low. If internal controls are effective, control risk come hoga na. So it is a function of how effective the internal control is. And in internal control, we want to say what? Design, implementation and maintenance. ठीक है? ठीक है? So, Hiral, what is your doubt? See, degrees of inherent risk means it can be lower, it can be higher. Different हो सकता है ना inherent risk. ठीक है? So, based on how higher inherent risk is, auditor will decide his test of control and substantive procedure. Is it clear? Student, I said ORS, that was just a technique to learn. Basically, it is objectives. Business risk, R for risk. Objectives, strategies and risk. Don't get confused अगर नहीं समझ आ रहा है तो. ठीक है? Ayush, is it clear? Karthik, is it clear? Here, Hiral, are your doubts clear? Procedural test, abhi we will see. And Shri Nagalakshmi, I did not receive any of your queries. Please send them again. Okay? Then internal control. So definition is given by which essay? Essay 315. So first of all, it is the process designed, implemented, maintained by whom? Management, those charged with governance, other personnel. Why? To provide reasonable assurance about what? Achievement of entity's objective with regard to 4 things. और यही 4 things purpose of internal control भी है. So what are those 4 things? Reliability of financial reporting, effectiveness and efficiency of operations, safeguarding of assets and compliance with applicable laws and regulations. And now students, if you compare it with the definition of internal financial control, ना, you will see that कुछ similar है, वहाँ पे more specifically related to finances है. So what are the objectives of implementing internal control? So first of all, the transaction should be as per authorization, general or specific given by management. The transaction should be promptly, immediately recorded in the correct amount, correct account and correct accounting period. Assets should be safeguarded from unauthorized access, and there should be a comparison of recorded assets and existing assets, and in case of any discrepancy, the appropriate action should be taken. Now, what are the benefits of understanding internal control? Students, as sir have told you, the topics covering points, learn them, है ना? ठीक है? So identifying types of attention misstatement, identifying factors affecting risk of material misstatement, designing the ND of further audit procedure. So what is the purpose? This is the same as the definition. Limitations, the internal control only gives what? The reasonable assurance. Why? Because of certain limitations. What are those? Human judgment in decision making, lack of understanding the purpose. Because jo exception report generate ho rahi, I gave you an example. The person who is getting it, he is not able to understand it. Okay? Then collusion among employees, judgment by management, and limitation in case of small entities. It is since only 1 or 2 persons are managing the entire organization in case of small entity, then segregation of duty cannot be done. ठीक है, and they can always since the internal control is less structured, they can always override it. Now, is the auditor required to understand all the internal controls? No, only controls relevant to audit. So it says that there is a direct relationship between the entity's objective and controls. They are required to give a reasonable assurance with respect to the objectives, but auditor is not required to understand all the controls. So what are the factors that auditor needs to consider? Very, very important: materiality, significance to related risk. So if an internal control is material for him, as per SA 320, he'll consider it as relevant to audit. Significance of related risk, size of the entity, entity's business, complexity, diversity, applicable legal and regulatory requirements, and circumstances and applicable component. So all these factors are there. We have discussed this, and now this is the point that where statute required, to then that control becomes relevant. So internal financial control is what relevant for the auditor over financial reporting. So what is the extent of understanding? I always tell you कि nut bolt लेके सब कुछ खोल के देखना है क्या? नहीं. You need to understand the design. Understand करना है that whether it will be capable of effectively preventing or detecting and correcting material misstatement, and you need to consider the implementation, whether the control exists and whether it is in the entity is using it. Inquiry कर सकते हो, observation, inspection कर सकते हो, सारी transactions को trace कर सकते हो in the information system. So it says that manual control है, तो you need to consider it again and again. बार बार check करना पड़ेगा ना. Why? Because IT तो automated होता है. So that if once it has been checked, it means कि consistent application है, which is one of the benefits of IT automated system also. ठीक है. And the last topic is in this with respect to internal control is what components. There are 5 components: control environment, entities, risk assessment process, information system, control activities, monitoring of control. You may get a descriptive type of question on any of these. Okay? Also, the elements of control environment are also very important. So control environment kya hai? Whatever environment management those charged with governance has created, whether they have maintained a culture of honesty, ethical behavior. Okay? It includes all these things: governance, management functions, attitudes, awareness, actions. The control consciousness, awareness. Consciousness means awareness. What are the elements of control environment? Ki communication kaisa hai, integrity or ethical values ka. Commitment to competence kaisa hai. If employees are competent, they have the requisite skill and knowledge, then only they will be able to implement the internal control effectively. Then participation of those charged with governance. Philosophy, attitude, operating style of management, organizational structure, assignment of authority and responsibility, and human resources policies and practices. Why human policies practices? Because human resource is the one who has to implement the internal control. So if they are satisfied with their recruitment, orientation, training, promotion, compensation, then only they are in a position to implement the internal control effectively as required. So the second component is entities risk assessment process. Entity bhi to assess karwayega na. How? So auditor has to see whether the entity has a process to identifying business risk, estimating the significance, assessing the likelihood of occurrence, and then how the corrective actions are taken. Information system consisting of hardware, software, people, and data, and then the communication. Okay? So this is the third component. So significant class of transactions kaise record hoti hain, right? How the accounting is done, how the transactions are initiated, recorded, processed, corrected, related records kaise hote hain, financial reporting kaise hota hai, general entries के around controls क्या है, anyone can do. So duplication of entries तो नहीं हो सकता है. So all these things are a part of what information system. And communication में क्या आ जाएगा? Communication of those charged with governance, with management, and communication with the regulatory authorities. And this was given to you as a homework and we discussed also that it basically says what kind of communication should be required. So the employee should be able to understand their roles and responsibility. They should be able to understand the relationship of activities, that my work will then be used by some other person. ठीक है? तो relationship, policy manual should be there. Internal control को कैसे use करना है? There should be manuals, है ना? Open communication channels. In case of any exceptions, these should be reported. However, all these are less structured in case of small entities. Now, control activities. I gave you example of sales. So I told you that the management gives certain policies and procedures so as to be sure that management directives are carried out. ठीक है. These are what control activities like authorization, performance review, information processing, physical control and segregation of duty. And control activities auditor needs to consider with respect to significant risk also. Now what is significant risk? We will look at the definition. So it is one of the inherent risk only which has both, जिसके चांसेस भी ज्यादा है और उसका मैग्नीट्यूड भी ज्यादा है. फॉर एग्जांपल फ्रॉड से रिलेटेड रिस्क या रिलेटेड पार्टी से रिलेटेड रिस्क. सो ऑडिटर को जब भी कंसीडर करना है वेदर अ रिस्क इज सिग्निफिकेंट और नॉट, ही विल कंसीडर ऑल दीज पॉइंट्स कि फ्रॉड से रिलेटेड है, इट इज रिस्की. There, if there is a recent significant change of accounting or other development, I told you from VAT to GST, risky है ना, from AS to Ind AS, है ना, रिस्की है. कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी ऑफ ट्रांजैक्शन, रिलेटेड पार्टी ट्रांजैक्शन, सब्जेक्टिविटी जैसे एस्टिमेट्स जहां मटेरियल अनसर्टेनिटी है, एंड वेयर अनयूजुअल ट्रांजैक्शंस हैं, अनयूजुअल नॉन रूटीन ट्रांजैक्शंस हैं या जजमेंटल मैटर्स हैं. सो दिस एक्सप्लेन्स कि अनरूटीन या अनयूजुअल ट्रांजैक्शन एंड नॉन रूटीन. सो बिकॉज मैनेजमेंट इंटरवेंशन ज्यादा होएगा ना वहां पर, डेटा कलेक्शन में भी मैनुअल इंटरवेंशन है, कॉम्प्लेक्स कैलकुलेशन है, एंड सिंस दिस इज नॉन रूटीन तो कंट्रोल्स भी नहीं प्लेस हो पाते हैं. ठीक है. मॉनिटरिंग ऑफ कंट्रोल टू असेस द इफेक्टिवनेस ऑफ इंटरनल कंट्रोल परफॉर्मेंस ओवर टाइम. इट हेल्प्स इन असेसिंग the effectiveness of control and if any action is required to take remedial action on timely basis. Management कैसे कर सकते हैं ongoing activities से, like work चल रहा है उसी में ही checking और separate evaluation में later on reports मंगवा के उसको study करना. It also includes reading the external party communication like any complaints which has been given by the customer. तो पता चल जाएगा ना what are the loopholes, what are the problems. In case of small entities, since management or the owner who is the manager also, he is involved in the day-to-day activities in the entire management, तो उससे monitoring हो जाता है. ठीक है. Now अब देखो internal audit function you have understood. Internal audit function में there was one what internal control का evaluation है ना. So internal auditor function can also be used to monitor the controls. And if there is an internal audit function, so we statutory auditor, we need to understand कि what are the activities performed by internal audit function, what are their plans, है ना, उनकी क्या responsibilities है. ठीक है. Now very important, you may get a straight 4-mark question that satisfactory control environment is not an absolute. देखो बहुत सिंपल है याद करना. Keywords. See, existence of satisfactory control environment क्या है? Positive factor तो है. ठीक है. While auditor assesses risk of material misstatement, how it helps to reduce the risk of fraud. However, it is not an absolute deterrent. अगर unsatisfactory control environment है, it undermines the effectiveness of control. ठीक है. फॉर एग्जाम्पल अगर मैनेजमेंट इज नॉट एबल टू प्रोवाइड सफिशिएंट रिसोर्सेज फॉर द आईटी सिक्योरिटी रिस्क, तो एनीवन अनऑथराइज्ड पर्सन कैन एक्सेस द डेटा एंड मेक चेंजेस ना. सो ऐसे 330 के अकॉर्डिंग जो आपका कंट्रोल एनवायरनमेंट है, इट इन्फ्लुएंसेस द नेचर, टाइमिंग, एक्सटेंट ऑफ ऑडिटर्स फर्दर प्रोसीजर, बट कंट्रोल एनवायरनमेंट इन इटसेल्फ डज नॉट prevent or detect and correct a material misstatement. Yes, it influences the auditor's effectiveness of other controls and his assessment of risk of material misstatement. Evaluation करना है हम why? Because we need to look at the quality. अभी तक हमने nature, design, implementation समझा, अब quality समझ रहे हैं, तभी तो हम internal अपना audit program बनाएंगे ना. If we make an internal audit program without evaluating internal control, my audit program will be unwieldy, that is unmanageable, unnecessarily heavy, because I'll keep on vouching number of things because I'm not relying on internal control na. So there are various benefits of evaluating internal control which is very simple. You can just have a look at these. ठीक है. Now what are the methods of इवैल्यूएशन का क्या मतलब है? आपको कुछ इंफॉर्मेशन कलेक्ट करनी है अबाउट द क्वालिटी. तो मेथड्स क्या है? नैरेटिव रिकॉर्ड, दैट इज एग्जॉस्टिव डिस्क्रिप्शन, कंप्लीट डिस्क्रिप्शन में आप लिखते रहते हो कि क्या प्रोसेस है. देन चेकलिस्ट क्या है? दैट इज द क्वेश्चंस दैट आर बीन गिवन एंड दीज क्वेश्चंस आर टू बी फिल्ड बाय whom? बाय द ऑडिटिंग स्टाफ. कि ये कर रहा है मैनेजमेंट, ये कर रहा है मैनेजमेंट. ICQ क्वेश्चनर हम किसको देते हैं? पार्टी को, कि क्लाइंट को, कि प्लीज फिल इन दिस क्वेश्चन, यस, नो, नॉट एप्लीकेबल के फॉर्म में होता है. एंड देन लास्ट इज फ्लो चार्ट व्हिच गिव्स एन बर्ड आई व्यू, है ना, नैरेटिव नहीं है इसके अंदर. सो ईच पार्ट ऑफ इंटरनल कंट्रोल या बिजनेस एक्टिविटीज के फीचर्स को ये बर्ड्स आई व्यू में समराइज्ड वे में लेके आता है. सो आई होप दिस समरी इज हेल्पिंग यू गाइज. पहले ये भेजो मेरे को, सेंड इन योर रिप्लाई. समझ आ रहा है कुछ? इज इट हेल्पिंग यू? Then we will take next 5-7 minutes in revising the rest of the part which we have done today. So first 3 lectures we have revised. Quickly send in your replies. समझ आ रहा है? Yes, Shri Nagalakshmi, you are absolutely correct. Experts can always be appointed. अगर internal auditor के area में नहीं है या statutory auditor के area में नहीं है, and suppose actuarial valuation है, so it can the experts can always be appointed. So students are saying, ma'am, it's awesome, ma'am, understood, it is very helpful, समझ आ रहा है. चलो good. So we will continue. So अभी तक we have understood the design implementation, we have evaluated. But अब ऐसे 330 कहता है कि auditor सुनो, you are giving an expert opinion without actually testing the internal control. आप कैसे उसके ऊपर rely कर सकते हो? तो please be doubly sure when you are relying on the internal control. तो auditor कहता है ठीक है, I'll test the internal controls. So it says that after assimilating is what? Fully understanding, auditor needs to examine whether and how far the same is actually in operation. Same is means IC. So he may do actual testing, but पूरा possible नहीं है ना, तो selective basis पर, and in such a way that all important areas are covered in a period of say 3 years. ठीक है, तो procedural test कर सकते हैं. What is application of procedural test? Whatever procedures have been laid down by management, whether these are being followed. और auditing in depth is starting और end तक एक transaction को पूरा अच्छा से check करना है in order to see that each and every step whether internal controls are working effectively. So design of accounting and internal control, whether they are capable of P or D and C. That is prevent or detect and correct material misstatement, and throughout the audit देखना है. ठीक है, then we saw that if understand कर रहा था auditor internal control and thereby he obtained some audit evidence that can be used as an audit evidence for the test of controls if it is sufficient. And कैसे कर सकते हैं test of control? Inspection करो, inquiry करो, observation करो, reperformance करो. अगर deviations हैं then what are the factors, है ना? It might be possible ना that staff change हो रहा है या कुछ unseasonal fluctuations हैं. So auditor needs to consider, he needs to test the controls appropriately covering such period of change or fluctuation. And if auditor feels that he needs to revise his assessment, he can always revise that. ठीक है, and procedural test क्या होता है? This is beautifully explained by this example, you all can go through it. ठीक है, internal control and IT में we saw that in internal control it can have manual elements, it can have IT. काम सब same होएगा, but manual में there is paper. However IT में automation है, तो risk associated different हो जाते हैं. So what is the mix of automated and manual? It depends upon the nature and complexity of entities used. Benefits and risk, very simple, you all can learn, and very important also. See, these are the point questions, है ना, जैसा सर ने कहा था. Points में दिया ना, easily quickly हो सकता है, just learn the keywords. ठीक है, then materiality and audit risk, ये देखो कैसे learn करना है, very important. Descriptive type में you can always get it for 4 marks. So कैसे learn करना है? देखो, you will say that materiality is considered while planning and performing an audit. Planning में भी use होता है, performing में भी, evaluating the effect of identified misstatement में भी होता है, forming an opinion में भी होता है. ठीक है, overall objective क्या है auditor का? To obtain a reasonable assurance that financial statement are free from material misstatement. है ना, जो मैं स्टोरी बोल रही हूँ ना, as it is mentioned. Now वो कैसे करना है? By obtaining sufficient appropriate audit evidence so as to reduce risk to an appropriate low level audit risk. Now what is audit risk? That the auditor gives an inappropriate opinion when the financial statements are materially misstated. It is a function of risk of material misstatement and detection risk. ठीक है, so audit risk and materiality throughout the audit consider होता है. See, materiality and audit risk are considered throughout the audit, in particular when identifying and assessing risk of material misstatement, determining ND of further audit procedure, and evaluating the effect of uncorrected misstatement and informing an opinion. देखो ऐसे याद करना है. अब am I cramming? I'm using my own words, and in fact I'm using Hindi also. So just pick up the keywords, use your own language as connecting words, और ऐसे याद करो. ठीक है, ठीक है, डॉक्यूमेंट करना है, हाँ करना है. एंड मेनी ऑफ यू वर सेइंग दैट देयर इज नो रिक्वायरमेंट. सी, डॉक्यूमेंटेशन तो करना ही है. व्हाटएवर procedure you perform in case let's say there is a charge of negligence at a later stage on the auditor. He cannot say ना कि मैंने ऐसे किया था. He will always say देखो मैंने ऐसा किया था. It is on the papers. ठीक है. So discussion among the engagement team, key elements of understanding obtained about entity environment, the risk procedures performed, the risk assessment procedure performed, the sources of information. ठीक है. Identified, assess a risk of material misstatement at both the levels. तो देखो अगर मेरे को याद करना होगा, how will I write it? यहाँ पे I'll write identified and assessed risk of material misstatement at both financial statement and assertion level. This is my technique to learn. And many of you were saying that, ma'am, are you a rank holder? Yes, I was a rank holder in foundation and final. And these were the techniques that I applied. ठीक है? So internal audit. Internal audit क्या होता है? तो I told you, जब internal audit की definition आता है ना, या internal audit function आता है, तो statutory audit को भूल जाओ. So independent management function है, continuous critical appraisal of functioning of entity है, with a view to suggest improvement, add value and strengthen the overall governance mechanism, including strategic risk management and internal control system. 138 कहता है listed company को रूल 13 में प्रिस्क्राइब किया है, लिस्टेड कंपनी को तो रखना ही है इंटरनल ऑडिटर. अनलिस्टेड कंपनी के लिए देयर आर 4 क्राइटेरियाज. Any of these is met in the preceding financial year, internal auditor को appoint करना है. Paid up share capital is more than equal to 50 crores in the preceding financial year. Turnover is more than equal to 200 crores in the preceding financial year. Or outstanding loans or borrowings from banks, financial institution is exceeding 100 crores or more. यहाँ equal to नहीं है. At any point of time during the preceding financial year, outstanding deposits of 25 crore or more at any point of time during the preceding financial year. Private company में turnover और outstanding loans एंड एडवांसेस का पॉइंट आ जाता है. लॉजिक है, आउटस्टैंडिंग डिपॉजिट्स तो हो ही नहीं सकते हैं ना प्राइवेट कंपनी में, पब्लिक डिपॉजिट्स एंड शेयर कैपिटल का पॉइंट को एग्जेम्प्ट कर दिया गया है. हु कैन बी अपॉइंटेड? कॉस्ट अकाउंटेंट, चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट एंड एनी अदर प्रोफेशनल. नाउ मेनी ऑफ यू आर आस्किंग कि ये वाला हो सकता है, वो वाला हो सकता है. सी, depending upon the requirement, अगर बोर्ड को लगता है that such kind of profession is required, तो he can be appointed as an internal auditor. Statutory auditor की तरह ही नहीं है कि chartered accountant ही चाहिए. ठीक है. Objectives क्या है? Activities relating to governance, relating to risk management, relating to internal control. Internal control में पहले evaluate करना है, फिर financial and operating information को examine करना है, review of operating activities, review of compliance with laws and regulations करना है. ठीक है. You were asking, ma'am, can statutory auditor rely on the work of the internal auditor? He can use the work of the internal auditor. He can take the assistance of the internal auditor, SA 610. ठीक है. Then only you need to read these names. ठीक है. Now, internal financial control, section 134, subsection 5, clause E explain internal financial control. And if you will see, more or less same definition है like internal control. So, policies and procedures adopted by company for ensuring these 5 things. You can go through these. Auditor की reporting requirement है, yes. Section 143 subsection 3 clause I में कहता है auditor needs to report on the internal financial control over financial reporting. Separate report जाएगा इसका. ठीक है. And there is a responsibility for the directors also that in their board's report they need to report with respect to adequacy of internal financial control. So internal financial control जो है, it is defined in your Companies Act, broader term है. Internal controls over financial reporting guidance note में आता है, whereby the auditor has to give a opinion with respect to that in his audit report. So with this we have covered the entire chapter, we have revised it, and see students, I have given my 100% to make sure that you are able to understand the entire chapter. Yes, the entire chapter is going to be much clearer to you once you go through the module in entirety. I always use the word in entirety. You need to go through the diagrams, the flow charts, the examples, the illustrations. They are required for your better understanding. Okay? Still, in case any doubt is required, I'll be taking few of your chapters which are remaining. So you can note your queries and you can send in your queries in those when we'll be discussing those chapters further. We have discussed all the MCQs and true false. Descriptive, we have discussed I think half of those, or till fourth question. I have uploaded the answer sheet also, so you can go through them. In case any doubt is there, you can always ask them in the next session. So I need a reply from your side, whether you have understood or not, whether this revision has helped you or not. And I'll do one thing, as sir has asked me to do. I will share his number here. In case of any query, like Karthik, you have asked 3 queries and you have a request to be made at the which you mention at the end. So you can always discuss with sir. Okay, I'll mention his number on the screen. So he is from Board of Studies. Okay, so the numbers are 97180 36119 9466789 Let me just check. Okay, so Karthik, that request you can always ask sir. Okay, so I hope it is helping you out. So hoping that you have had a happy learning, and hoping that you will continue to have happy learning in these sessions, and you will definitely take the advantage of these sessions like Parth Shah had, who has secured 67 marks, and he has specifically mentioned that only by following these techniques, only by attending the live classes provided by institute, he has obtained 67 marks in audit with an all over India rank, 15th rank. Okay, so with a very positive note, I'll end this session for today, and we will meet for the next session. Thank you for being a patient listener and for making these sessions interactive. So thank you a lot for all your support, and please learn and start reading and do that homework of file definition as sir has given. Audit risk definition, inherent risk, control risk, risk of material misstatement, detection risk. And as sir has asked you to read them 5 times a day for the next 3 or 5 days. Okay? Thank you so much, students. Thank you and good night. Done.